Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 30. Ragnarok begins. Explosions rocked the training area in the backyard of the mansion that the Grimoire peerage lived in. The training ground, which was just a large space of nothing but sand and rocks and boulders, shook as fire plowed into the ground. Sand turned red, bubbled, and melted, becoming liquid like magma. Steam hissed all around the field as the superheated sand emitted powerful heat waves that distorted the atmosphere. A small figure darted between the balls of fire. The figure was Kaneko. She wove between the fire, which ranged from tiny spheres that exploded as they hit the ground to large cones that were so hot the ground melted. Meanwhile, high above her, flying on wings made of fire, Ravel continued launching attack after attack. "How have you gotten so fast?" Ravel asked in a loud shout that rang out over the explosions. "I thought you were a rook." Kaneko didn't respond with words. She kept darting past each attack that came her way. Sweat poured from her brow. There was a frown on her face. While these attacks all came really close to hitting her, so close that fire and heat washed over her like an avalanche, none of them were actually close to landing a true hit. Most would have assumed this was all her doing. Kaneko knew better. Ravel is missing me on purpose. Thanks to her ability to use nature chakra, Kaneko could sense the intentions of others, to some degree at least. She wasn't as good at it as Naruto was. Still, it was enough to let her know that these near misses were intentional. The only question Kaneko could ask now was, what was Ravel planning? She soon found out when cracks appeared along the ground. The area around her caved in and lava gushed out from the cracks, forcing Kaneko into the air. She used her wings to fly. However, Kaneko was a cat, not a bird. Even if her wings theoretically allowed her to fly, she did not have the predisposition for it. Ravel took advantage of that, slamming into her like a fiery projectile. Kaneko was smacked back as Ravel headbutted her stomach. She flipped end over end. Sadly, she couldn't recover either because her opponent launched another attack, a fire blast that soared toward her like a spear. The attack was powerful, certainly, but Kaneko didn't let that bother her as she readied her fist, straightened her flight, channeled nature chakra into her punch, and literally demolished the flaming attack with naught but her fist. The attack was still powerful, however, and Kaneko was pushed backward by the destructive force. She landed on the ground. Ravel was still in the air. She and Ravel looked at each other, one floating high over the other. Despite this being a spar, both of them were treating it as though they were in a real life or death battle. They'd thrown any number of deadly techniques, so many that even Naruto thought it looked like they were trying to kill each other. "You're pretty strong for a kitten," Ravel said with a glare. "You're strong for fried chicken," was Kaneko's immediate. "Don't call me that." Ravel created another pillar of fire underneath Kaneko, though it was easily avoided. This didn't deter her and she launched more and more attacks, all with the purpose of hitting Kaneko, though it didn't look like her attack were doing much. Once again, however, Ravel was using her abilities to trap Kaneko, not hit her outright. This was as much a battle of wits as it was a sparring match between friends. It didn't matter if she trapped Kaneko or not. When that happened, Kaneko used her nature chakra abilities to destroy Ravel's flames. At some point, the two became completely exhausted. Naruto, who'd been watching the spar from start to finish, looked at the pair as they sat on the ground, their backs leaning against each other as they breathed heavily enough that it looked like they'd run a marathon. "Good work, you two," he said. "Why don't you go wash up? I'm sure breakfast will be ready soon." Ravel and Kaneko had begun training together only recently. Naruto wasn't sure when they decided to start training with each other, but they had asked him to watch them when they did. He'd done as they asked and watched them spar every morning for the past week. He was surprised, though. He didn't think Ravel cared about getting stronger. "Are you going to join us in the bath?" asked Kaneko. While Ravel looked at her shoes, Naruto shook his head. "Not this time. I actually have something else that I need to do." Naruto watched both of their expressions shift to disappointment, but it was his turn to check on Rosweiss. They had discovered early on in the days she started living with them that Rosweiss was a very serious person. However, she was also very susceptible to teasing and tended to get upset easily. It supposedly had something to do with the way she had been treated when she was working under Odin. Rosweiss also suffered from night terrors. That was, Naruto suspected, a side effect from having her mind controlled with something infused with nature chakra. He found Rosweiss in her bedroom. She wasn't alone this time, which was probably fortunate. Irina, and Ophis oddly enough, were with her. Rosweiss was wearing a dark gray business suit with a short skirt. She sat on a stool while Irina sat behind her and combed her hair. "You have such long and pretty hair," Irina complimented. "I wish I had hair like this." "Oh, thank you," Rosweiss said. Judging from how she blushed, it seemed she wasn't able to take compliments very well, another result of her treatment at the hands of Odin and her fellow Valkyrie, no doubt. "If I had hair like yours, I bet I would look even more like an angel." Right. You girls should really lock the door," Naruto said as he walked in. "What would happen if you three were naked when I walked in?" He was teasing, of course. That kind of thing didn't happen in real life, at least, not often. However, given that he, Kiba, Issei, and Gasper were all living with them, it was definitely important to lock the doors, lest one of them accidentally walk in and find themselves in a compromising situation. "That would never happen," Irina said with a laugh, though her cheeks did turn red. "Naruto, please do not joke about such things," Rosweiss, her hair now combed and perfectly straight like a shimmering waterfall, said. "I know that you are something of a joker, but all jokes have a time and place. Please keep that in mind." Yes, Naruto waved her off with a smile. "Anyway, breakfast is probably ready by now, so come down once you're finished. It's a big day for you three." School was starting up again, and since these three had become official members of this house, they were all going to be attending school. Ophis was going to Kuo Academy as a freshman alongside Ravel and Kaneko. Meanwhile, Irina was going to be in the same grade as him, Issei, and Kiba, while Rosweiss was going to be a teacher. He had no idea how this was going to turn out. Rosweiss was a serious woman who always took every matter, whether that was shopping at a 100-yen store or lecturing Issei on why he shouldn't be so perverted, as if it was a matter of life and death. Given that she was going to be his homeroom teacher, he could only wonder. Either way, it was sure to be interesting. "Devil Ninja. Then we are all in agreement?" Sirzex asked as he looked around the conference table. Sitting at the table with him was Michael, Azazel, Gabrielle, Barakiel, several other members of the Archangels and the Grigori. There was also his compatriots, Seraphol Leviathan, Ajuka Beelzebub, and Falbium Asmodeus. In total, there were 20 people present. The table they sat on was not round, but it wasn't rectangular either. It curved to create a strange wave-like aesthetic. No one sat at the head. Since this alliance was one in which there were no true leaders, they had decided that a head was unnecessary. Sirzex sat in the middle with Michael on one side and Shemhazai on the other. They had been debating the matter of what to do with Loki and his takeover of Asgard, which they had learned about from Rosweiss, for over a week now. This was a serious issue. No, it wasn't just serious. Loki had killed Odin and taken over Asgard, enslaving its people using strange devices that none of them had ever seen and even Ajuka couldn't analyze. All they knew was that it used nature energy. They only knew that because Naruto had told them that he sensed nature chakra coming from it during his fight with Rosweiss. "I believe we are," Michael said at last. "Are we really sure it's a wise idea to send in an army?" asked Shemhazai. He was a member of the Grigori, and its newest leader. Azazel had resigned some time ago, claiming that he wasn't a good leader. "We still don't know the full situation." "We'll probably never know the full situation," Seraphol said, currently acting the part of a Mao and not a crazy magical girl. "I think it's better to take the initiative than it is to wait for him to attack us, especially since we don't know what he's planning." "Point," Shemhazai said with a nod. "Then that's how it will be," Sirzex said, standing up and placing his hands on the table. "In 2 days' time, we'll travel to Asgard, free all of the people who've been placed under Loki's control, and defeat Loki. Let's end this in one decisive battle." "Before Ragnarok can begin," Michael added with a serious nod. Everyone nodded in agreement. Devil Ninja. Since they were all going to the same place, everyone walked to school together, chatting away as if nothing had happened this summer, as if they hadn't survived a life or death situation in the underworld. They drew a lot of attention as well. Perhaps it was because of how many people there were, or maybe it was because more than half of those people were gorgeous women, but everyone stopped and stared as they walked, especially when they reached Kuo Academy and strolled through the gates. I feel like we've suddenly turned into mice in the middle of a group of cats, Rossweiss mumbled as she eyed the students that stared at them, and her in particular. Being the newest, and a mature hottie to boot, Naruto could understand why she was being given more attention than Ophis and Irina. A mature adult woman was infinitely more interesting to horny teenagers than two girls their own age. That was just how things went with boys. Just ignore the crowd, Kaneko said. They're a bunch of dickless cowards anyway. The most they'll do is stare. Okay, then, I'll follow your advice. Kaneko gave Rossweiss a thumbs up. You're golden, Rossi. What? I'll show you to the principal's office, Rias said as they stepped into the school building. Oh, thank you, Rossweiss said with a bow. Everyone went their separate ways, though not before Naruto got 3 kisses from 3 separate women. Ophis also tried to kiss him, but since they weren't dating right now, he'd said to wait until he at least took her out on a date. There were steps to follow. Rossweiss had given him the stink eye for some reason, or maybe she'd been giving the girls the stink eye. It was hard to tell. Naruto shared classes with Kiba. As they walked into the homeroom, Kiba was assaulted on all sides from the girls in their class. Kya, Kiba-kun, how was your summer? Did you have fun? You should have called me. Isu wanted to spend time with you. Yeah, I even got a cute swimsuit that I wish you could have seen. Ladies, Kiba greeted with an easy-going smile. Only Naruto noticed the tick mark on his head. I'd love to have spent time with all of you, but my club and I actually had some important work to do this summer. Sorry. Ah, Kiba looked at Naruto, the way his face twisted into a grimace, as though in pain, practically begged him for help. Naruto just smiled as if to say, you're on your own, buddy, and walked over to his seat. The way Kiba's face morphed into one of betrayal tickled his funny bone. Class eventually settled down, though it took 15 minutes of girls squealing and guys giving Kiba the death glare, and it was during this time that Rossweiss entered the room. It was almost funny. The moment Rossweiss stepped in, every single head turned to her with machine-like precision. Many of the guys suddenly went beet red, or they started drooling lustfully, while the girls eyed her like she was competition. Either way, Rossweiss appeared to have finally mastered her surprise at being gawked at, for she didn't respond to their blatant ogling. Rias must have given her a pep talk. Good morning, class. Rossweiss adjusted her glasses, which he noticed she hadn't been wearing until this morning. They must have been for aesthetic purposes. My name is Rossweiss, and I'm going to be your new homeroom teacher. I'm not very experienced as a teacher, but I hope we can all get along. While many of the boys cheered at his proclamation, the girls just groaned and gave the appearance of people who wanted to slam their heads against the table. They probably thought she was competition for Kiba's affection, or something to that effect. Hey, teacher, one of the students said. He was a young man with spiky brown hair and blue eyes. Naruto thought his name was Oshizuku, or something like that. Would you mind if we asked you some questions? You know, to get to know you better. Rossweiss paused. She had been prepared to dive right into their lecture, but now she was considering the young man's question with a seriousness that Naruto didn't think it deserved. Well, I don't see why not, she said. Giving these brats permission to ask her questions was a mistake. The moment she said it was okay, the boys all stood from their seats and began firing off questions at a rapid rate that made Rossweiss's head spin. What are your 3 sizes? I can't tell you that. How large are your tits? That question is rude. Do you have a boyfriend? Well, no, I don't, but. Have you ever had a boyfriend? Well, I have not. Then doesn't that mean you're a virgin? Our teacher is a virgin who's never had a boyfriend. While Rossweiss's face had been growing periodically red thanks to the rude questions, her face suddenly froze with that last question. Not only that, but it began paling rapidly as tears welled up in the woman's large blue eyes. It's true, I've never had a boyfriend. Rossweiss suddenly started crying in earnest, tears streaming from her eyes like nothing else. They reminded Naruto of waterfalls. Go ahead and laugh at me. I don't care anymore. Wah! No one seemed to know what they should do. Rosweiss was on the ground, bawling her eyes out like a child who'd just been spanked by their parent. Even Naruto didn't know what to do. In the few days that he had known her, Rosweiss had never once responded to a question like this. What's more, it made the mature aura that surrounded her evaporate like a fire jutsu being doused with a water jutsu. What should we do? The new teacher is crying. This is all the fault of you boys. What? How is this our fault? If you hadn't asked her so many perverted questions, this wouldn't have happened. As the girls used this opportunity to browbeat the boys about their perversion, Naruto continued staring at Rosweiss in shock. Seriously, where did that stern young woman disappear to? It looked like Rosweiss wasn't as mature as he had first assumed, or maybe she had merely been putting up a front this whole time. Naruto ignored the argument, stood up, and made his way to the front of the classroom. He stepped in front of Rosweiss, put his ring finger and thumb in his mouth, and whistled, loudly, so loud that the noise pierced the air and made everyone stop arguing. Even Rosweiss ceased crying when he did that. All of you need to shut up and sit down, Naruto commanded. Everyone sat in their seats and closed their mouths with a loud clacking sound. He nodded. Good. Now, I'm going to take Rosweiss to the nurse's office. You have free study period until then. Kiba, keep an eye on everyone, will you? If anyone acts out, list them down and tell me later. I'll make sure they regret acting out. You got it, Naruto, Kiba said. Several people shuddered at this threat, no doubt trying to imagine what sort of prank he'll pull on them if they act out. While he hadn't pulled a prank in a while, everyone was aware of the pranks he used to pull, and they had better believe he would prank their asses into next week if they didn't listen to him. Turning to Rosweiss, Naruto extended a hand. Come on, let me help you up. I can stand on my own, Rosweiss suddenly muttered, turning her head away from him. Don't be so stubborn, Naruto said as he reached down and grabbed Rosweiss' hand. She let out a mouse-like squeak as he helped her up. There's nothing wrong with accepting help. Now, come on, let's get you to the nurse's office. Oh, no. I'm really all right, Rosweiss tried to say as he dragged her out of the classroom. I really should be starting this morning's lesson. You aren't in any condition to teach right now, Naruto rebutted. Now come on. Left with no other option, Rosweiss grew silent as Naruto pulled her to the nurse's office, which was really just a large room made of white tiles, white walls, and a white ceiling. Several beds were located in the nurse's office. Naruto ignored those since Rosweiss wasn't sick. The room was empty. Since it wasn't being used, Naruto had her sit down on the chair by the desk, then made her a cup of jasmine tea. Here, drink this, he said. Oh, thank you. Rosweiss accepted the tea and took a tentative sip. After the first sip, she took another, and then another. It looked like she liked this kind of tea. Are you feeling better? Asked Naruto. Yes, a little. Rosweiss blushed. I'm sorry you and the other students had to see me in such an unsightly manner. Do you want to talk about it? When Rosweiss stared at him, he added, You don't have to. I just thought it might help. There's not a whole lot to talk about, Rosweiss said with a sigh. It's just as you've heard. I'm 19 years old already, and I've never once had a boyfriend. Back in Asgard, everyone used to make fun of me for it. They would always call me awful nicknames like the Valkyrie who's never had a boyfriend. They said it was because I was too stiff, and that no man would want to date a woman who was so serious all the time. They also made fun of me a lot for being Odin's aide, calling me his secretary on the side, and other crude nicknames. Sounds like you've had it rough. When Rosweiss finished her tea, Naruto took the cup from her and set it on the table. I don't know what their problem is, but I think they were just jealous. Jealous? Rosweiss blinked. Because you're so pretty, Naruto clarified. I am. Rosweiss looked down at her lap. Of course you are, Naruto said, sighing. What was with these girls who seemed unable to realize their own beauty? It was stupid. You're gorgeous. Any guy would be blessed to date you. That's probably why the other Valkyries kept making fun of you. They were worried you'd steal their men away from them. Is she blushing? Thank you, Rosweiss mumbled. It's nice of you to say that, even if you don't mean it. What makes you think I don't mean it? Rosweiss looked back at him as he grinned. I would totally date you. Rossweiss squeaked. Anyway, now that you're feeling better, do you think you can go back to class and teach? He held out his hand. Don't worry. If anyone says anything stupid again, I'll take care of them. Rossweiss hesitated for another second before tentatively putting her hand into his, letting him pull her to her feet. I think I can, she said. That's the spirit. Now let's go back to class. With Naruto leading the way, the two headed back to the classroom. What an interesting start to the new school semester. Devil Ninja. Like most higher dimensions, getting to Asgard required someone to activate the gate from the other side, normally. In most circumstances, the person who activated the gate to Asgard was Heimdall, known in the mythology as the whitest of the gods. He was the one who possessed foreknowledge, keen eyesight, hearing, and kept watch for Ragnarok. However, since the likelihood of Heimdall being controlled by Loki was high, they had to use another method. Are you sure that device of yours is going to work? Michael asked Azazel as they stood in the center of several stones jutting from the ground. The area around them was nothing but dirt. Past the stones, which formed a circle around them, grass encroached upon the earth. Azazel was holding a staff in his hands. Archaic symbols ran along its surface, glittering silver in the light. The staff had been forged from the remains of Gungnir, Odin's staff, which had been destroyed by Loki. According to Azazel, they could use it to forcibly open the gate to Asgard. Of course I'm sure. Azazel began channeling energy through the staff, which was basically the same as an artificial sacred gear now. Ajuka and I ran all kinds of tests on this thing. There's no way it can't not work. Trust me. Michael, Azazel, Sirzex, Shemhazai, Gabrielle, and Seraphol were standing in the center of the circle. However, they were not alone. Each of them had brought an army with them. Arrayed around the circle, some hovering in the air and some standing, were over 10,000 angels, devils, and fallen angels. They had changed their uniforms. Since they had become an alliance, everyone had decided to give them matching uniforms. Dark blue pants and shirt with light blue piping wrinkled as wings flapped. Gleaming silver breastplates shone in the light. Shoulder pauldrons and greaves clinked together. Everyone was wearing gladiator sandals. It was a very basic uniform, but they thought it suited their new coalition, and it should help prevent friendly fire. The place where they were now was the location of the gate that led to Asgard. Technically, the gate could be activated anywhere in the world, but only Heimdall had the power to do that. That meant in order to open the gate, there were 3 items they needed: a location within the country of Asgard's origin that was strong in magic, an item that had ties to Asgard, and several people with the powers of an ultimate class being. Fortunately, with 2 archangels, 2 leaders of the fallen, and 2 Maus, they weren't in short supply of power. They also had Gungnir, and the place they were at was in Germany, where Norse mythology originated from. I don't have much choice but to trust you, Michael said with a sigh. Don't worry too much, Michael, Sirzex said, standing next to Seraphol. Azazel might be a bit of an airhead, but you can trust that his ideas, at least, are almost always correct. Azazel laughed off Sorach's insult. Listen to Lucifer. He knows what he's talking about. Michael just sighed again. It was eventually time for them to get started. The new moon was high above them, a symbol of new beginnings and one of the more powerful times of night. He, Gabrielle, Shemhazai, Sirzex, and Seraphol stood around Azazel in a circle, channeling their energy into the staff that Azazel held, while Azazel slammed the butt of Gungnir into the ground. A soft ding rang out from the point of impact, echoing with an abnormal loudness, the ringing sound spreading across the entire clearing. It was obnoxious. However, none of them paid attention to that. They were more focused on how the staff was lit up. The symbols, written in the ancient Nordic language, pulsated several times. With each pulsation, the staff's glow grew brighter, until, without warning, everyone standing in the circle felt something pulling them. It was like they were being sucked into a vacuum. A vortex opened up all around them. Michael wanted to shout a warning at his comrades, but it was far too late by then. Even if he did scream, nothing would come of it. Not that it mattered. His voice had been lodged into his throat. It was like his throat had closed around his vocal cords, cutting them off. When the sensation of being sucked into a vacuum finally stopped, they were not standing in the clearing. A circular plate made of polished stone was beneath their feet. There was a large circle behind them, a gateway made of a unique metal that none of them had ever seen before. The gateway was inactive just then. Heimdall, the guardian who should have been in front of this gate, was nowhere to be found. "It looks like we're the only ones who made it through," Sirzex said. "Seems that way." Michael looked around. "I cannot see our army anyway, which means they are still on the other side." "Azazel," Gabrielle asked, "is there a way to open the gate now that we're on the other side?" Azazel tried to open the gate via Gunir several times. Theoretically, it was possible for someone who didn't belong to that specific myth to open the gate from Asgard to the human world. However, no matter how many times Azazel tried, nothing he did worked. That was when Michael realized it. "I believe this is a trap," he said. Sirzex nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. It looks like Loki knew that we would come for him. In that case," Shemhazai began, "the only thing we can do now is continue to press forward." "I agree," Serafal said. The group of 6 walked along a broad walkway that overlooked an ocean. The still waters were calm, eerily so, but then, the silence was also quite eerie. Up ahead stood Asgard, the stronghold of the Norse gods. Massive towers and large buildings sat upon the rocky outcroppings of a gigantic mountain range. The largest of these buildings, Odin's palace, sat in the center, on a large mountain that looked like a city had been built into it. "It's too quiet," Gabrielle muttered as she looked at the buildings they passed. "If this is a trap, then that is only natural," Michael said. "This is the cliched silence before they spring the trap part," Azazel added. It was true that it was far too silent there, but it wasn't just that. It was the complete and utter lack of people that disconcerted them the most. Asgard should have been filled with the Asgardians, the Norse gods and goddesses who ruled over Germanic myth. There should have been hundreds of people walking along these walkways, standing inside of the buildings. That no one was there disturbed them more than they were willing to let on. "Sirzex," Serafal said suddenly, "there are several people in that palace up ahead." "How many?" asked Sirzex. "I sense 20, no, 30. "That's probably the welcoming party," Azazel joked. Shadows eclipsed them as they walked under a massive archway, which also seconded as a bridge. A set of large steps stood before them. They walked up those, past columns, all the way to the top, where a large double door sat, made from bronze, gleaming brightly as though freshly polished. Sirzex walked up to the door and pushed it open. A loud groan resounded around them, ominous in that it was the only sound present. A well-lit interior revealed itself to them as they walked through door, moving slowly in case of an ambush. No one greeted them, however. No one leapt out at them. Their situation was probably more eerie for that very reason. They walked through a hallway made of marble, with open windows on one side and lateral passages on the other, and through it all, they didn't see a single living soul. "The presences have all disappeared," Serafal said. Then she paused. "No, wait, there's one presence up ahead." "That would probably be Loki," Sirzex said. "He's likely playing tricks on us." Sirzex was the first one to step into the throne room, a responsibility he took upon himself because he was the most powerful among them. It was a large, open space. Colonnades formed a sort of path that led up to a massive throne, upon which Loki, Norse god of trickery, lounged as though he were an indulgent king. "Welcome to Asgard, misbegotten creatures of Christianity," Loki said, smiling as he remained where he was, as though he didn't care that 6 of the most powerful Christian figures had come to slay him. "We've come to put a stop to whatever it is you are planning," Michael said, stepping forward. "We won't allow you to unleash Ragnarok." Loki smiled before, finally, he stood from his chair in a graceful move that made Michael blink. It was almost as though he'd teleported. "You cannot stop Ragnarok," Loki said, and it seemed to be a signal. Serafal screamed that the presences that had disappeared were back. At the same time, several Norse gods and goddesses appeared before them, surrounded them. Michael recognized a few like Thor, Freya, Balder, Frigg, Tyr, and Sif, but there were quite a few who he couldn't name right away. Not only had the Norse gods appeared, but a giant winged serpent flew into the room. Michael knew this creature. It was 10 times larger than the ones they had fought at the Colosseum, but there was no mistaking this creature. Magarsormr, the real sleeping dragon, the dragon of End, the world serpent. Michael could see now why he was called the largest dragon in the world. Unlike those clones, he truly was massive, easily spanning a kilometer in length. He was so large only part of his body could fit inside. All of the Norse gods and goddesses were armed. Thor had his infamous hammer, which was said to generate storms with every swing. Freya twirled her spear with the precision of an experienced warrior. Bows and arrows, swords, knives, all manner of weapon was pointed at them, all of them legendary and powerful. Michael wanted to curse himself, to curse them for this plan, but he already knew that there was nothing they could have done. Loki had to be stopped. The problem was that he didn't know if they would be able to stop them, not when they were up against an entire pantheon. For you see, my Christian friends, Ragnarok has already begun, Loki finished, lips twisting into an arrogant sneer. Devil Ninja. After getting over her issues about not having a boyfriend, Rosweiss proved herself to be an excellent teacher. Naruto soon discovered that Rosweiss's serious demeanor lent itself well to teaching. She was also well versed in their lessons, and she explained everything in a way that even Naruto, who couldn't care less about school, could understand. There was just one problem. Rosweiss's figure. More specifically, her boobs. It was clear to Naruto that she was wearing a bra, but even so, the way they popped out of her business suit was distracting for the male students. Naruto was sure they had spent more time staring at Rosweiss's tits than they spent listening to her lecture. Of course, this wasn't her fault. If anything, the people to blame were the boys who lacked self-control, which was every boy except for him, Kiba, and a few others. It made him feel bad for the woman. Being ogled like that couldn't be enjoyable. There wasn't much Naruto could do about that. He was just a student. Fortunately, Rosweiss didn't seem to notice the leering looks. Perhaps she was just so serious about everything she did that she was oblivious to how her looks made heads turned. After school, Naruto exited the classroom with Kiba and Rosweiss. With Azazel gone, she was acting as their current advisor. Of course, it wasn't like there was much for her to do. Azazel hadn't done anything either. Really, all she did was watch them as they went about her business. Of course, there was one person who Rosweiss, the serious woman that she was, took issue with. I cannot believe you would be so disgusting as to put a pair of panties on your head. Rosweiss was lecturing Issei, who had been running around with a pair of black lace panties on his head. Naruto thought they were Akanos, until he saw a beet-red Irina standing several meters away, near the shower room. She was dressed in nothing but a towel. Look, I already told you that I didn't put those on my head, Issei said. They were hanging from this clothesline, I didn't see them, and I accidentally walked into them. Rosweiss crossed her arms and glared. A likely excuse. I'll have you know that I was Odin's secretary for 2 whole years. I know perverts, and you are definitely a pervert. Hehehehe. Issei chuckled in a dark manner that seeped with lecherous intent. You underestimate me, I am not just some pervert. Oh. Rosweiss raised an eyebrow. Then what are you? Puffing out his chest as though in pride, Issei shouted, I am a super pervert. Rosweiss took a step back as though she'd just been slapped in the face. Naruto couldn't tell if the redness on her cheeks was due to embarrassment, rage, or both, though he'd bet on it being both. The doors opened during this time, and Kaneko walked in alongside Ravel and Ophis. She took one look at the situation, frowned, and then looked at Naruto. I'm guessing the perv did something pervy, she asked. Seems that way, huh? Kaneko accepted this with a nod, then pulled Ravel and Ophis over to the couch. Come on, Yakitori, dragon. I've got some sweets that I'm willing to share with you. Ravel sighed. I wish you would stop calling me by that nickname. Not happening. What kind of sweets do you have? Asked Ophis. It's a kind of mochi. Kaneko, Ravel, and Ophis sat together on the couch, and Kaneko brought out some mochi that she broke into pieces and shared with Ophis and Ravel. As they nibbled on their treat and spoke amongst each other, Naruto felt his heart lighten. It was nice to see them getting along. Seeing that Irina was still embarrassed, and Rosweiss was still arguing with Issei, Naruto grabbed the girl's underwear, walked over to her, and held the panties out to the girl, who took them from his hands with an embarrassed blush. Thank you, she muttered. May I ask what happened? I don't mind telling you, but please let me get dressed first. Irina, panties now in hand, rushed back inside of the shower, the curtains closing behind her. Naruto heard the rustling as she dropped the towel and began changing. He could also see the outline of her body through the curtains. Maybe he was imagining things, but he could have sworn he could even see the outline of her nipples. She came out about a minute later, now dressed. During the time that she'd been changing, Naruto had spent it watching the argument between Roswise and Issei get progressively worse. It was kind of funny. Issei used to be so meek and docile around women, but now he was arguing with a woman whose body was, as Issei might say, banging. I wonder if this is the result of whatever happened between him and Akeno. Certainly, Issei seemed a lot more confident than before, and he was a lot more lively again. When Akeno had dumped him, he'd been listless. Even after trying to move on, he'd rarely spoken out except during battle. Yet now, here he was, yelling at a woman who was accusing him of being a pervert. Had this happened months ago, he would have just taken his lumps. Akeno, Rias, and Asia had arrived while Irina was getting dressed. It seemed Asia was trying to placate Issei and Roswise, but she wasn't having much success. Roswise's face had become red, and for some reason, tears were welling up in her eyes as though she was getting more frustrated by the second. So, what happened? Naruto asked the still blushing Irina. I think it was my fault, she admitted. I had gotten really dirty while helping clean out the gym storage shed. Rias said I could use the shower here, so I did. Then Issei came in and... He didn't walk face first into your undergarments, did he? Irina's blush told Naruto all he needed to know. I see. Ag, you are so annoying. I didn't do this on purpose. Issei grabbed his hair and shouted. You know, for someone who has such a smoking hot body, you've got a really shitty personality. That's gonna make it hard for you to get a boyfriend. That was the wrong thing to say. Naruto barely had a second to think. Before Roswise began wailing again. You think I don't know that? She cried to the now shell-shocked Issei. Tears streamed down her face like waterfalls as she sank to her knees. I know that men don't like me. I know that. I know I'll never get a boyfriend. No, I didn't mean. That's why everyone calls me the Valkyrie who could never get a boyfriend. Look, I only meant, it's like this. Wah, devil ninja. Almost from the get-go, Searsex and the other 5 who'd come to Asgard with him, had been forced to fight separate battles. Not only were they being forced into separate fights, but they were fighting 5-on-1. Overwhelmed and outnumbered, it was the worst-case scenario. No, it might have been worse than the worst-case scenario. Searsex was fighting a completely defensive battle. Against the forces of Thor, Freya, Frigg, Hermod, and Sif, it was all he could do. Thor struck at him with his hammer, a mighty swing that caused lightning to burst from the legendary weapon, Mjolnir, and race toward him. The ground in front of him, rocks and marble, was ripped from the ground. It scattered everywhere as though more than just lightning was flying Sorch's way. The air itself exploded and burst as though being torn apart by a storm. Searsex would have moved out of the way. No sane person would have taken this attack head-on. He couldn't, however. Freya and Frigg were already attacking him in a pincer maneuver, and Sif was immediately behind him, 2 swords in hand and ready to skewer him. If he wanted to make out of this, he needed to deal with the attack in these 3. Creating a magic circle in front of him, Searsex unleashed as much power as possible without losing control. The lightning from Mjolnir slammed into his magic circle. The powers of destruction clashed with the powers of Asgard's mightiest warrior. The air between them combusted, blasting at his face, making his eyes water. However, he couldn't afford to remain idle. Freya, Frigg, and Sif were coming in from the other 3 sides. If he didn't deal with them, he'd be done for. This would be so much easier if I could just kill them. Releasing a loud shout, Searsex temporarily turned his entire body into the powers of destruction, and then sent a good portion of that power at the 3 attacking him from behind. The results was that all 3 women were blasted away. Sadly, he didn't see Hermod hiding beneath him until it was almost too late. Searsex grunted as he raised his forearm to block the dagger aimed at his throat, gnashing his teeth together as the small weapon pierced his armor. Fire flared through his arm and up his shoulder. It wasn't terrible, however, it distracted him long enough for Thor to unleash another attack, one that would hit both him and Hermod. He's willing to attack his own brethren. With a grunt, Sirzek grabbed Hermod and threw him out of the way of the attack, thus taking the attack head-on. Lightning tore through his body. He would have screamed, but he didn't have the breath to unleash one. Snarling in concentration, left with no other option, Sirzek once more became the powers of destruction. Everything around them shook. The ground, the columns, the walls, everything. Cracks appeared along the ground as Sirzek released his power, which helped negate Mjolnir's lightning attack at the cost of damaging the surroundings. Because he was nothing but pure energy, nothing could hurt him. At the same time, he was pretty much destroying everything. The ceiling, already under threat of being destroyed, crumbled away as his powers ate at it. Knowing that he couldn't continue releasing this much power if he wanted to save the Norse gods from Loki's mind control, he sealed his powers back up the moment Thor's attack dissipated. Sirzek looked at the five surrounding him once more. With Thor in front, Frigg and Freya on either side, and Hermod standing behind him with Sif, he was pretty much penned in. And he wasn't the only one having trouble. Nearly a dozen meters away, battling through the skies, visible through the now destroyed palace, Michael was being bombarded with attacks from Magni, Tyr, Not, Skadi, and Ire. He might have had it even rougher than Sirzek. Tyr, god of war, clashed against Michael's light swords with his massive war axe. He should have been slow wielding such an unwieldy weapon, yet he swung the damn thing like it was a feather. Michael was being pushed back, and matters only worsened when Magni slammed into Michael with his mace. The Archangel of Heaven, leader of the Heavenly Gate, was able to avoid the attack, but it was a near thing. What's more, he ran into Skadi, who used her powers of winter to freeze Michael's wings. As the Archangel of Heaven fell, his wings no longer able to maintain height, Tyr and Magni attacked in unison. The result was a devastating shockwave that Sirzek could feel even from where he stood. The remaining columns of the palace were blasted away. What remained of the floor shattered. Sirzek was forced to become the powers of destruction once more, lest he be squashed by the overwhelming force slamming into him from above. When the fierce, howling winds and massive pressure ceased, he returned to his original state. He was standing inside of a crater. Flying out of the crater, Sirzek surveyed the scene. The palace was gone. The throne where Loki had been sitting was no more. He couldn't see his previous opponents anywhere, and his companions were not in his immediate vicinity. Two massive serpents of ice rose in the distance, attacking a dragon 4 times their size, Magarsormr. Earth-shattering roars echoed from the battle. Magarsormr bit into one of the serpents, tearing through it as though it was made of paper. The other attacked it while it was distracted. It didn't seem to do anything. The ice serpent's teeth shattered against Magarsormr's hard skin. Then a massive beam was launched from the dragon's mouth, and an explosion so massive and powerful that the world around him was whited out with light erupted against the ground. Sirzek was given no more time to search for his other companions. Thor, Freya, Frigg, Sif, and Hermod surrounded him again. They weren't alone. Loki also stood before him, and what's more, Loki was holding an unconscious Gabrielle by the neck. Gabrielle, her normally beautiful pale skin bruised and black, was leaking blood from her mouth and several cuts that marred her flesh. Her 12 wings hung limp. Her white dress was torn, revealing more skin than she would have probably been comfortable showing off. He could tell she was alive. She was still breathing. However, her injuries were extensive. If she didn't get help soon. She tried to save them, Loki said, and suddenly, 5 more gods and goddesses from Norse mythology appeared around Sirzek. Lips twisted into the sort of disturbing grin one would expect from a madman, Loki continued. It was a foolish notion. She should have just killed them. You and those in your mythology are far too soft. I knew it, Sirzek muttered. You're using the same method to control these people that you used for the ones who fought us at the Colosseum. However, those devices aren't something a person like you can create. Who's your backer? Backer. HMPH. Loki scoffed as though the concept of him having a backer was absurd. Those fools in the Chaos Brigade aren't my backers. I'm merely using them for my own purposes. Once I've placed you and all those who came with you under my control, I'll begin my campaign to destroy this pathetic world, along with those idiots from the Chaos Brigade. Now, then, I tire of talking, so I'm going to have these people defeat you. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Your powers are far too useful for me. That said, you're going to become my unwilling slave until Ragnarok claims you." As his words signified an end to the conversation, the now 10 gods and goddesses began the battle against Sirzex anew. Left with no other choice but to go all out, Sirzex summoned all of his power. The energy he released crashed into the Asgardians, sending all but the strongest flying. Sirzex didn't stop there. Having unleashed everything he had, his body quickly transformed, converting into energy, the powers of destruction, which the Baal clan was well known for. As its name suggested, the powers of destruction was, in essence, the power to annihilate everything it touched. One could consider it the erasure of all that existed. Only a being that was even more powerful than an ultimate-class devil, such as the heavenly dragons or the Ouroboros dragon, could withstand this incredible power. The ability that Sirzex was using was known as Aura of Destruction. This was Sirzex's true form. It was when his entire body was completely transformed into the powers of destruction, the powers condensed into a human shape. While in this form, his power was immense, easily surpassing the powers of the original Satan. At the same time, he didn't have complete control over it, so the powers of destruction spread the longer he remained in this form. "So, this is your true form, Sirzex," Loki said as he floated in the air, far enough from Sirzex that his powers could not reach him. Gabrielle was still in his grasp. "I see now why so many fear you. In this form, you are easily one of the most powerful beings in this universe. However, not even you can defeat the entire forces of Asgard." Sirzex said nothing. He could have spoken if he wanted to, but he was already busy. Thor came in with his hammer swinging. Sirzex smashed the hammer apart, destroying it, annihilating it until nothing remained. Another burst of power sent Thor flying. Sif and Freya came at him from behind, one swinging a sword and the other trying to pierce him with her spear. The spear he annihilated. Just touching it caused the weapon, legendary and powerful, to evaporate as though it was water disappearing on a hot summer day. Sirzex then punched Sif in the chest. Her armor disappeared as she was sent flying. Fortunately, Sirzex was able to hold back enough that he hadn't killed her. She would live. Something tried to impale his throat. The dagger, which was being swung by Hermod, vanished as it touched his body, which was now nothing more than condensed powers of destruction. In return, Hermod was sent flying by a kick to the face. Sirzex didn't know if he died. His powers were no longer under his complete control. However, between himself and his comrades and them, Sirzex was going to choose himself and his comrades. Protecting your companions was only natural. Everything became a blur of colors, streaks of light that attacked him from all sides, images that he could barely discern. Sirzex fought. He fought and fought and fought. He had no idea how long he battled, how many people stepped up to face him, how many were killed or injured. He just didn't know. Time lost its meaning. The world had become shades of red as everything was consumed by his powers of destruction, which spread across Asgard at a slow but steady pace. It could have been hours. It could have been minutes. At some point, a voice penetrated the fog of battle. "I'd suggest you stop," it said. "Unless you want your companions to die." Sirzex did stop. It took a concerted effort, but he reined his powers in, though what had already leaked out continued causing havoc. The world around him was different from the one he'd been in before. The palace belonging to the Asgardians was gone. Sirzex was standing in a crater several kilometers deep, the results of his own powers wreaking havoc on this world. He didn't see any of his opponents. Had he accidentally killed them? It was entirely possible. His powers in that form were beyond his control. They might have been annihilated and he'd never know it. "You really are powerful," Loki said. He was floating above Sirzex, uninjured. Many of the Asgardians were also with him, as was Magarsormr. Not only that, but they were all holding one of his companions, whose beaten and battered frames sent a shock through his body. "I must admit," Loki continued, "I never expected you to be this powerful, but now that I have seen your power for myself, I want to subdue you all the more and take your powers for my own." "What makes you think I'll let you do that?" asked Sirzex. "Because if you don't, I'll kill your friends," Loki said. "I could always kill myself. Then I'll just place these 5 under my control and use them to attack your little sister." Loki chuckled when Sirzex stiffened from fear and rage. "Yes, I'll use them to attack your sister. I won't kill her, not right away. I'll rape her first, and then I'll let the Asgardians rape her. Slowly, through a combination of torture, rape, and mental attacks, I'll break her mind and soul before dismembering her and using her body to build myself a new throne. Searsex gritted his teeth. He didn't think Loki was bluffing. That was something he would do, and while he wanted to have confidence that Naruto could protect her. All right, he said with a sigh. I'll surrender. Good. Loki showed off his white teeth with a wide grin. With you in my pocket, we're one step closer to Ragnarok. Naruto, Searsex thought as the Asgardians descended upon him like a pack of ravenous beasts. I beg you, please, protect my little sister. Devil Ninja. 2 weeks passed by in the blink of an eye, and not a whole lot happened during that time, at least, nothing that concerned Kaneko. Some new rumors had spread about Naruto seducing the hot silver-haired teacher. Apparently, someone had caught them chatting in the nurse's office several days ago, and that had somehow turned into Naruto screwing Rosweiss on one of the beds. Kaneko didn't know about what had really gone on during the time where Naruto and Rosweiss were speaking in the nurse's office, but she somehow doubted they had been fucking. It wasn't Naruto's style. He also had her, Rias, and Ravel if he wanted to have sex. She didn't think he'd go to Rosweiss unless something happened between them and they fell in love. It was the weekend. As usual, Kaneko was spending the day with Ravel and Ophis. They had been spending more time together, possibly because they were in the same class, and it had gotten to the point where several people were calling them the Lowly Alliance because they were all small and cute, or something like that. Such opinions didn't really concern Kaneko. Can you believe the nerve of that store clerk? Asked Ravel. That disgusting man was staring at us. Kaneko shrugged. Did you think Eyes was the only perv? I know he's not the only pervert, Ravel muttered. I just don't like how that guy was staring at us. Naruto stares at us in a similar way. That's different. I'm just messing with you, Yakitori. So, all humans stare at us like this? Asked Ophis. Pretty much, Kaneko said. Though only a certain type of man stares at little girls like us. A certain type of man. A lolicon, Kaneko said, and then added, like Naruto. But is Naruto really a lolicon? Asked Ravel. He's dating Rias-sama, so I don't really think he meets that criteria. True enough. Naruto is the kind of person who enjoys all types of girls, Kaneko agreed. They were on their way home from visiting a nearby sweet shop. Kaneko had gone there because she wanted to buy some more candy, but Ravel had gone with her because she wanted to steal their recipes and use them in a cake for Naruto. She and Naruto often had tea together. Kaneko didn't know what they talked about during that time. That was Ravel's time with him. On the other hand, Ophis just seemed to be following them because it amused her, or maybe it was because she was studying their bodies for future reference. She couldn't tell. As they walked down the street, a strange smell caught her attention. She recognized this smell. Kaneko, Ravel shouted as she ran off. Where are you going? Kaneko didn't answer. She was too busy following the scent. This smell, it was. Devil Ninja. Rias was hard at work. Sitting behind her desk, Akeno standing behind her, she diligently read through numerous reports. Most of the reports dealt with Grimoire clan holdings in the human world. The Grimoire clan owned several businesses here in the human world, and since she was living there, her father had placed her in charge of managing them. This was also a test to see how well she could manage people. It seems like we've had more work these past 2 weeks, Akeno said as she diligently refilled Rias' cup with steaming hot tea. That's what happens when more than half of the 3 factions alliance goes off to deal with another pantheon, Rias said, taking a sip of her tea. Thank you. Yufufu, you're welcome. Setting the teacup down, Rias leaned back and looked at the extra stack of papers that she had. These ones had nothing to do with the clan. These ones revolved around the 3 factions. They ranged from simple requests to outright demands, to dealing with logistics and funding for people seeking to move to Kuo. Among the list of people who would be coming to live in Kuo, all of the people who had taken part in the raiding game, minus a few of the young devils, were requesting permission to live here. As she continued to work, the doors to her office were slammed open and Kaneko leapt in. Rias-tan. What? Rias barely had a second to grasp the situation before Kaneko bounded across the room, leapt onto the desk, and then slammed into her like a guided missile. The chair tipped. They were both sent to the floor. Stars exploded behind Rias's eyes as her head cracked against the carpet. She blinked several times. Akeno was hovering above her, a befuddled smile plastered on her face. She wondered why for a moment, when Rias-tan, your boobs are so big. Nya ha ha ha. Kaneko was lying on top of her, nuzzling her face into Rias' chest while the girl's fingers sunk into her boobs as though they were squeezing marshmallows. Rias bit back a cry of surprise when her bra was suddenly unhooked. Kaneko, what are you doing? Skinship. Kaneko cheered as she slipped a hand into Rias's shirt, sliding between the buttons and grabbing her bra. Rias squawked again when Kaneko pulled the bra out of her shirt. How was she doing this? Oh, my, you foo. Stop laughing, Akeno, help me, Kya. Rias struggled even more fiercely when Kaneko slipped a hand back into her shirt and began fondling her boobs. Electric jolts raced up and down her spine. She tried to ignore it, but it was hard. This girl wasn't quite as good as Naruto, but Kaneko seemed to know some of her weak points. Rias-sama, Ravel said as she burst into the room. Unlike Office, who also rushed into the room, Ravel was breathing as though she had run a marathon. Rias-sama, Kaneko is. We already know, Akeno said, gesturing to her and Kaneko. By now, Kaneko was beginning to undo the buttons of Rias's shirt. It wasn't long before her breasts popped free from their confines with a noticeable jiggle. Oh, no, it looks like we were too late, Ravel said, her cheeks flushing red as she saw the way Kaneko was rubbing her cheeks against Rias. Never mind that, Rias both moaned and shouted. Will someone please tell me what is going on here? An explanation was quick in coming. It wasn't one that Rias wanted, but as she moved to the couch with Kaneko, who sat on her lap and was now sucking, nibbling, and licking her nipples, she at least received an explanation that explained Kaneko's state. So she smelled catnip. Rias would have sighed, but Kaneko chose that moment to bite her nipple, and Rias had to grit her teeth to keep from moaning. Why yes, Ravel said, nodding. Era, Akeno giggled. Quiet you, Rias muttered bitterly, though it was completely ineffective because she had Kaneko licking her chest. Her mind was growing hazy. What should we do? Asked Ravel. We'll just have to wait it out, Rias said. The effects should only last for an hour or so. Maybe we should get Naruto to help, Office offered. Rias opened her mouth to tell the girl that that wasn't a good idea, but Ravel was a step ahead of her, a step ahead in the wrong direction. Good idea. Ravel hopped back to her feet. Wait right here, I'll come back with Naruto-sama. Wait, Rias shouted as Ravel rushed out of the room. Well, she tried to shout, but when Kaneko slid a hand into her panties and rubbed an index finger along her lips, her mouth refused to work the way she wanted it to. As the door closed, Rias prayed to whatever deity was listening that Naruto was not home right now. Or they would all be in trouble. Devil Ninja, Naruto and Irina were on their way home from the grocery store. Naruto had gone out to shop for dinner that night, and Irina, who didn't have anything else to do, had decided to join him. It had made the event much more fun. On Irina's suggestion, they had grabbed supplies to make an Italian dish called cheese ravioli. Naruto didn't know how to make that, but Irina apparently did. She told them that she'd make dinner this time. He was looking forward to it. I'm surprised you haven't had it before, Naruto-san. I've only had what other people make me, or what I make myself. Naruto shrugged. No one's made this ravioli before. Then you're in for a real treat. It was a beautiful day, though with it being so late, evening would be coming soon. Even so, the air was cool against his skin. As they walked, Irina's hair swayed back and forth. They reminded him of streamers caught in the wind. They arrived home and took off their shoes. It felt weird not to have Metatron pounce on him while screaming, Ninja-sama, at the top of his lungs. Naruto wondered what the Archangel was doing. They were supposed to be dealing with Ragnarok, but did it really take 2 weeks to take care of the Asgardians? Just how strong were these Norse gods anyway? The pounding of feet reached them before Ravel did, the young girl turning the corner and rushing up to them, tripping over her own 2 feet in her effort to reach them. Naruto-sama, she shouted. What's wrong? Asked Naruto. It's Rias and Kaneko. There. From the moment Revel mentioned Rias and Kaneko, Naruto stopped listening. He rushed past Revel and ran for where he thought they would be, Rias's room, except they weren't there. Frowning, Naruto tried to think of where they else might be. Kaneko's room, maybe, but no, if they weren't in Rias' room, why would they be there? They had to be somewhere else. Naruto-sama, Revel gasped as she and Irina rounded the corner. Office, Rias-sama's office. Right, I'm there. Naruto hurried down several hallways, through an outdoor hall masked from the sun by a roof, and burst into the office that held Rias and Kaneko, the office that Rias used when conducting business in her capacity as the king of a peerage. He didn't know what he had been expecting to find. Given the urgency in Revel's voice, he had assumed that Rias and Kaneko were in some kind of danger. Whatever he was expecting, whatever thoughts he might have had, none of them matched up with what he discovered. Rias and Kaneko were on the bed. It was a large bed, massive enough to fit a dozen people, a canopy hanging over it. Rias often used that bed when she was too tired to reach their bedroom. He'd sometimes find her with only half her body on it, as though she'd passed out before being able to properly lie down. The crimson sheets had become a tangled mess, twisted around the two figures. Rias, the buttons of her shirt open, exposing her large breasts, was panting heavily as Kaneko fondled her nipples with dexterous fingers. The Nekosho was sitting behind Rias, who leaned against her as if her body had become boneless. In return, Kaneko licked up the sweat from Rias's neck. His girlfriend's cheeks were flushed a dark shade of red, and the enticing jiggle of her breasts was enough to make him aroused. Naruto had no idea what to say. His mind was frozen solid, iced over like he'd been dunked head first into the waters of the Antarctic. At the same time, all of the blood in his body was rushing toward one specific area, and it was growing larger as the seconds passed. Is this what they call arousal? Ophis asked as she crouched next to him. Oh Ophis, Naruto squeaked as he adjusted himself. What are you doing he asked. His question partially stalled when a loud moan erupted from Rias. Naruto glanced over, but he had to quickly look away. Kaneko had stuck her hand down Rias' panties and was clearly fingering her. His girlfriend's hips were bucking, and a dark stain was growing on the fabric, while juices ran down her thighs. I've been observing the situation, Ophis said, looking at Rias and Kaneko. I had no idea that catnip could do this to a Nekosho. Catnip. Naruto knew what catnip did to cats, having used it in some of his pranks before, but he hadn't known that catnip worked on Nekosho as well. From the looks of it, it seemed like catnip caused Nekosho to feel an overwhelming lust. Maybe it sped up their mating cycle. That was his first thought, at least. Not that it mattered. Whatever had happened, he needed to find some way to resolve it. Maybe if her lust is satiated, she'll go back to normal. Naruto walked up to the bed. The dark red panties that Rias was wearing were completely stained, and her thighs glistened with a combination of her sweat and juices. He hadn't realized Kaneko was so skilled at making other women orgasm. Kaneko. Kaneko's ears perked as her yellow eyes, complete with black slits, focused entirely on him. Rias had also opened her eyes, though she was too tired to do much more than whisper his name. Most of his attention was on Kaneko this time. The Nekosho let Rias fall back onto the bed and was crawling toward him on all fours, a smile on her face that spelled nothing good. Naruto-kian. Kaneko pounced quicker than a viper, but fortunately, Naruto had expected something of this nature. He grabbed the girl before she could tumble into him, snatching her out of the air and throwing her back onto the bed. Time was of the essence. Naruto pinned Kaneko to the bed before she could pounce again. The girl struggled underneath his grip, hissing at him, though that stopped when Naruto crushed his lips to hers. The girl's entire body went stiff, from her toes all the way to her ears. It only lasted for a second before her arms wrapped around his neck as she returned the kiss. Her tongue sought entrance to his mouth, but he didn't give it. He pushed his tongue into her mouth instead. As his tongue encountered the warm wetness of Kaneko's mouth, the girl in question rubbed herself against him, grinding her hips along his erection. Her underwear was already soaking. She must have been incredibly horny long before he ever arrived. It might have even been a combination of Kaniko's and Rias juices. Knowing better than to let someone who was essentially doped on catnip set the pace, Naruto forced the girl to stop. Kaniko let out a dissatisfied "Nya" at being unable to move. Naruto merely bit her neck. She stopped. Then she let out another, less demanding noise, which sounded more like a plea. Naruto placed a hand on her chest. Unlike Rias, whose ample breasts were large enough that his fingers sank into them, Kaniko didn't have much there. She wasn't quite flat, but it would be hard to discover something unless they were searching. That didn't mean much. Kaniko was still sensitive, and as Naruto rubbed her nipples through her shirt, he heard her release a lyrical sound that was half moan and half pure. Naruto. Rias questioned him. What are you? You and she can't. He knew what Rias wanted to say, but he had no intention of having sex with Kaniko just yet. She wasn't ready. Her body was still too immature. But he could still satiate the lust running through her body via other methods. Kaniko was wearing a standard pink spaghetti strap shirt. Naruto slid his hand underneath her shirt, placing it on the small lump of her right breast. Her nipple was already stiff. He rolled the hardened nub between his thumb and index finger. Another purr emitted from Kaniko as her tail curled around his left thigh. If I can make her come a few times, I should be able to satiate her lust. Naruto pushed Kaniko's shirt up to her chest and leaned down. He took her right nipple into his mouth. Hands threaded through his hair, pulling him down. Naruto swirled her nipple around his tongue, then tugged on it with his teeth. A loud cry rang out. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was one of ecstasy. Sliding one of his hands beneath both her skirt and into her panties, Naruto immediately sought out her entrance, guarded by partially engorged lips. She was wet. His fingers slid along her glistening entrance before sliding in with a squelching sound. Kaniko's back arched and her hips bucked. Naruto pushed his finger deeper into Kaniko's entrance, while he used his thumb to find her clit. The moment he did, he stroked her as one might stroke a cat. The bucking of Kaniko's hips got worse. Her body convulsed. She shook back and forth as her loud cries reached a crescendo, and then, all at once, she slumped back onto the bed. Naruto, having decided he hadn't had quite enough, reached under her skirt and slid her panties, drenched in her juices, off her legs. Starting from her feet, Naruto kissed his way up her legs, spreading them apart as he let his lips and tongue trail along her skin, until he was licking the juices directly from her. Kaniko shuddered and moaned. Naruto lapped up her love nectar, enjoying the heady scent and taste like it was ambrosia. Not stopping until he was satisfied, Naruto eventually pulled his head out from between Kaniko's legs. The Nekosho was staring at the ceiling. However, her eyes were glazed over. Her chest heaved up and down, and her body was covered in a light layer of glistening sweat. Naruto leaned over Kaniko, to see if she would respond to his presence, but when she didn't, leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in another kiss. It took a while, but Kaniko did eventually respond to his lips. She kissed him back. Naruto nibbled on her lower lip, then pulled back. Kaniko blinked at him several times, but much like a cat that had just had its fill, she turned around, curled into a ball, and fell asleep. Naruto, looking up at the still exhausted Rias, whose half-lidded eyes made Naruto's already stiff lower region hard enough to cut diamonds, Naruto grinned. What do you think? I'm so good at using my tongue that I can take the edge off someone who's high on catnip. Rias snorted. Don't delude yourself. She was already nearing her limit when you showed up. If anything, my perseverance is what saved the day. No. It was definitely my skills with my tongue. My endurance and stamina. My talents. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is? We'll see who really made the catnip run its course, my stamina or your sexual prowess. Deal. Winner chooses what we get to watch tonight. As Naruto crawled over to Rias and engaged in a passionate kiss as they began to masturbate each other, he forgot about the rest of the world, forgot that Ophis was still in the room, forgot that Ravel and Irina had been following, forgot everything. He probably shouldn't have. Devil Ninja. Ravel had arrived in time to see Naruto dominate Kaniko, to watch as he played with her body like it was a fiddle. Every moan, cry, and purr had caused her body to quake. Each thrust of Kaniko's hips as Naruto fingered her had left Ravel stunned. She and Naruto had done some stuff together, but it was nothing like what was happening in that room. Naruto had fondled her breasts before, swirled her nipples in his mouth, and done similar activities. However, she had never once let him go below the waist. It wasn't something she was comfortable with. Naruto had respected that. And yet now she was seeing Kaneko, her close friend, and half the reason she was in a relationship with Naruto, the other half being Rias, orgasming from Naruto's fingers. It was almost animalistic. Naruto's hand was in Kaneko's drenched panties. His mouth was on her chest, swirling her nipples around with his tongue as he plunged his fingers into her. All the while, the girl in his grasp writhed and moaned as though she was possessed. Revel didn't know what to say. She'd been stunned into silence. What's more, seeing Naruto bring Kaneko to several orgasms made her body feel hot. It was the same heat she felt when she and Naruto engaged in intimate activities. Revel reached down between her legs and placed a hand over her crotch. She almost moaned when a jolt like lightning raced through her, and she jerked her hand back. What am I doing? Naruto eventually finished pleasing Kaneko, who curled on her side and fell asleep. Revel dared to hope that it was over. Then Naruto and Rias began having sex. Revel had intimate knowledge when it came to sex thanks to Riser, but she'd never seen it before. Watching the two go at it was even worse than watching Naruto play with Kaneko. Revel's entire body was burning. There was an unbearable heat in her loins that she needed to satisfy, and it was making her head fuzzy. Fascinating. The voice beside her almost made Revel scream. She turned. Ophis was standing next to her, watching as Naruto and Rias played with each other's privates. Oh, Ophis. Ophis turned to her. There was a look in the other girl's eyes that she'd never seen before. It made her very uncomfortable. You are aroused. What? And no, I'm not. Ophis tilted her head. You are aroused. I can smell your arousal. Revel blushed and covered her crotch as though that would somehow hide whatever Ophis was smelling. This girl could smell her arousal. How mortifying. Do you want to experiment with me? Asked Ophis suddenly. What? I'm curious to know what an orgasm is like. I'd ask Naruto, but he's occupied with Rias. That's why I'm asking you. Ophis stared at her with those two black eyes that reminded her of obsidian. Revel's cheeks became inflamed. It wasn't just her cheeks either. Her entire body burst into flames. It felt hot. She felt unbearably hot. It was strange. She was a phoenix, so she shouldn't get hot, but right now it felt like she might melt at any moment. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Her legs moving of their own accord, Revel ran out of the room. She made it all the way to her bedroom. Slamming the door closed, she leaned her back against the door and sank to the floor. Chest heaving, Revel closed her eyes and tried to get the image of what had transpired out of her mind. However, her mind wasn't having it, and neither was her body. Revel gasped as an electric shock ran through her. Looking down, she blinked several times when she noticed that she was touching herself again. She started to take her hand away. Then she stopped. Slowly, embarrassed by what she was going, Revel rubbed herself through her cotton panties. It felt good. Revel had never touched herself before, though she had once heard the term masturbation from her brother. Riser had gotten his head bashed in for that. She had told herself that it was unsightly, that it was disgusting, and she would never do it. So much for that. Unable to stand it anymore, Revel lifted her shirt so it exposed her breasts and unhooked her bra, freeing her boobs from their confines. She slid one hand into her panties and fingered herself directly, while the other hand went to her breasts, which she tweaked and pinched like she'd seen Naruto do to Kaneko and Rias. It felt so good. It was like an electric current of pleasure running through her system. Revel lifted her hips as she continued to masturbate. Something was coiling inside of her body. It was just below her stomach. She didn't know what it was, but her stomach was tightening, her thighs were quivering, her juices were drenching her legs, and her butt was clenching. A little more. A little more. Revel screamed into her shirt as she came. Her juices overflowed down her thighs as her body slumped back against the door. As she laid there on the floor, the slow realization of what she'd done dawned on her. Her face caught fire. The door was also lit on fire as a result. How was she ever going to confront Naruto-sama now that she'd done this? So mortifying. Chapter 31. The Dangers of Complacency. 1 month had passed since Sirzeks went with the other leaders of the three factions alliance to Asgard, and in that time, no one could tell Rias why her brother hadn't returned. The army that had gone with him had already come back. They had reported to her father that Sirzeks, Seraphal, Azazel, Shemhazai, Michael, and Gabrielle had been transported to Asgard without them. The army had waited for nearly a whole week before returning to heaven and the underworld. Sitting in her office, Rias worked diligently on her paperwork. With Sirzeks gone, a lot of his work had been sent her way, though Graphia was also handling some of it as well. Even so, her workload had nearly tripled. Amal had a lot more work than a mere king, even one who belonged to a clan from the 72 Pillars. She paused halfway through one stack of documents, rubbed her eyes, and then leaned back in her seat, shoulders slumping as though she was carrying the weight of the world on them. It certainly felt like there was a world on her shoulders. A knock on the door echoed before it opened and Akino walked in with a smile. She was pushing a tray in front of her, which had tea and scones. "Good morning, Bucho," Akino greeted with a smile that was far more genuine than the ones she used to show. "Pulling another all-nighter?" "Akino." Rias returned the smile with a tired one of her own. "Yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Sadly, I've not much time to do it." "Are you sure it's just that? What are you implying? That you aren't sleeping because you're too worried about your brother?" Rias sighed. "I am worried. However, you don't need to worry about that. Naruto comes in and makes sure I get some sleep. Every night when she pulled an all-nighter, he came in and forced her onto the bed, then gave her a back and foot massage until she fell asleep. He'd done the same last night, and the night before that. She'd woken up early this morning with him still in bed. Naruto wasn't there anymore because he'd gone to train, but he would definitely come back in an hour or two in order to force her out of the office." "That's good. Your boyfriend seems to have a handle on how to deal with you." "HMPH. Akino set a cup filled with black tea and cinnamon on the desk, then grabbed a plate, filled it with scones, and put that on the desk. "Make sure you eat your fill. If you're going to work on minimum, then you need another form of sustenance." "I will," Rias promised. After putting Rias's breakfast on the desk, Akino pushed the tray to the side, and moved to stand behind her as she continued to work. While she wrote something in a report, she grabbed a scone. She paused after taking a bite out of it. "This is delicious. Yufufufu." It was made by Ravel and Irina. They've apparently started cooking together, since they both like to bake so much. "I didn't know they were baking together." "That's because you've been cooped up in your office." Rias said nothing to that. It wasn't long before she was interrupted again. There was a knock at the door. Rias, thinking it was Kiba or maybe Irina, granted them permission to enter. She never expected to see the people who walked in. It was Metatron and Barakiel, Akino's estranged father, who entered her office. Akino stiffened as the two walked in. Rias remained calm as both Angel and Fallen stood in front of her desk and offered a polite bow. "Metatron. Barakiel. It's been quite a while since I've seen either of you." Rias paused, making it appear like she was gathering her thoughts, but she was actually using it as a minor stalling tactic to prepare herself. "To what do I owe the honor of your visit?" "I don't know how else to say this," Barakiel began in a gruff voice, "so I'm just going to come out and say it." He took a deep breath. "Yesterday evening, we received a report that Sirzeks and the other three faction leaders who went to Asgard with him are attacking the Greek pantheon." "What?" Rias didn't think she had heard right. Out of all the things that could have been said, this was simply the most unbelievable. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Barakiel gave her a pained grimace. "We're not exactly sure what's going on ourselves, but they launched an attack on Mount Olympus just yesterday. They were repelled, but we're now facing a serious crisis. The Greek gods are demanding an explanation from us," Metatron added, for once serious, for once not going on about ninja. "Unfortunately, we don't have any explanation that we can give. We assume that all of the people who went to Asgard have somehow been placed under the control of Loki, but we have no idea how to explain this in a way that won't make it seem like we're making excuses." Rias felt Akino's hand come to rest on her shoulder, but that did little to settle her nerves. Her brother and the others had attacked another pantheon. Not only that, but they had attacked the Greek pantheon, one of the oldest surviving pantheons in the world. The three factions didn't have the strength they used to possess. Even with people like Sirzex and Michael on their side, their faction was far from strong. They didn't have the numbers, lacked the resources, and the one god in their faction was dead. In short, attacking another pantheon, especially one of the strongest, was a surefire recipe for self-annihilation. She knew that her brother and the others were not doing this on their own initiative. They were more than likely being controlled by those strange devices that Loki had been using. Rias never imagined that her brother could be controlled by such a thing. However, perhaps it was not a matter of strength. Maybe those devices used some means that even the most powerful of beings could not protect themselves against. This is definitely Loki's doing, she said. That goes without saying, Barakiel said. The problem is that we're now in a bind. The Greek gods have given us an ultimatum. Either we kill Sirzex and the others ourselves, or they'll destroy our faction. What? No. Rias stood up from her seat and slammed her hands on the desk. A loud thud echoed across the room, but her focus was on the two in front of her. They can't. We can't. My brother, and the others, they. Barakiel looked away while Metatron sighed. We don't like either of those options ourselves. However, we may not have a choice. We're going to try and find some way to save them. We can't really afford to let our leaders die, but we might not have a choice. Metatron and I were told not to say anything to you, Barakiel told her. However, we believe you have the right to know what's happening. We're going to inform Sona Citri as well. Rias wanted to scream, she wanted to cry, she wanted to do a lot of things, yell and break her desk. She did none of that. A king could not afford to lose composure. She took a deep breath and projected an aura of confidence that she didn't feel. I understand. Thank you for letting me know. You're welcome, Barakiel said softly. I wish we had more to offer you, Metatron added. Barakiel and Metatron soon left, and as the door shut behind them, Rias closed her eyes and tried to think. Sadly, her thoughts were in disarray. Her mind was scattered, particles of sand blowing everywhere, twisting and obscuring her vision, or rather, clouding her ability to think. She couldn't find a solution, an idea on what she should be doing, while in this state. Go talk to him, she said suddenly. Excuse me, asked Akino. I know you wish to speak with your father, Rias said. Go talk to him. Akino hesitated for a second, and then hurried out of the room. Rias remained there for several more seconds. She watched the door that Akino had left through. Then she stood up and hurried out of the room as well. She needed Naruto. Devil Ninja. Ever since the catnip incident, Kaneko had been insatiable. More than ever, she sought Naruto's affection in a more physical sense, a more intimate sense. It wasn't just Naruto either. Rias had also been subjected to Kaneko's lust, which seemed to disregard genders completely. Ravel had almost been a recipient, but Naruto had stopped Kaneko, knowing that Ravel wasn't interested in any Yuri action. Rias had theorized that it was because she was a Nekoshoke devil hybrid. The effects of the catnip were essentially magnified several-fold, so even though most of it had worn off, some parts still remained. It was unknown how long it would take for the catnip to fully leave her, or if maybe the side effect was a permanent change. Naruto and Rias had been helping Kaneko take the edge off. Basically, they had her join them in bed. Kaneko hadn't had sex yet. However, he and Rias had done any number of other activities. When Naruto had asked Rias why she was helping, her answer had been, Kaneko isn't just my rook. She's my family, one of my sisters, and someone I love dearly. She is also an indispensable part of our relationship. Did you really think I would let you help her all by yourself? So while Naruto was the most involved with satiating Kaneko's newly awakened sexual appetite, Rias also took part in their activities from time to time. It was, oddly enough, one of the few activities that could currently get Rias to stop working. She wasn't there right now, though. Naruto and Kaneko were in the hot spring after training with Irina and Kiba that morning. Ravel normally joined them, but she'd been conspicuously absent. Steam rose all around them, clinging to their skin, mixing with their sweat. The heady scent of minerals was combined with their own unique scents. A unique smell that belonged solely to Kaneko was accompanied by a variety of noises, Kaneko's gasps, meows, purrs, and moans. Kaneko sat on the lip of the hot spring, her thighs resting on Naruto's shoulder, feet locked together behind his head at the heels. She was using one hand groped her breasts, pinching and tweaking her nipples. The other hand was on Naruto's head, pulling him further between her legs. Her cat ears were twitching sporadically as she shook her head back and forth. Naruto, Naruto, I'm so close. Kaneko only called him Naruto when her lust had consumed her. It was a strange tick, but he thought it rather adorable. It was also a surprising turn-on. Who knew having someone call his name in cat speak could be so hot? Like a man dying of thirst, Naruto lapped at her lips, teasing her entrance and swirling his tongue over her clit. Her legs had already tightened to the point where a normal human's head would have been crushed. Good thing he was a devil. Even so, it still hurt. Her scent was incredibly intoxicating. It invaded his nose. It was not an unpleasant smell. He enjoyed her scent and taste. The amusing thought that he was dining on Kaneko almost made him snort as he ate the girl out. Kaneko fell backwards onto the tiles, her back arching, head thrashing as she cried out his name over and over again. Hearing her continuously call out his name made him more aroused than he thought possible. He wished her body was mature enough for sex. They'd have already done the deed if it was. Naruto kept a steady grip on her thighs. He loved the way her muscles bunched underneath his touch. They coiled, strong and powerful, yet trembled and shook at the same time. The softness of her skin combined with the hardness of her muscles created a strong but satisfying dichotomy. Naruto, I'm coming. For several seconds, every muscle in Kaneko's body became unbelievable tight. Her legs strengthened their grip on his head, to the point where it actually hurt, and then, all at once, Kaneko went completely slack. Her legs fell limp, her body became like a wet noodle, and when Naruto lifted his head, it was to find Kaneko staring listlessly at the ceiling. He grinned, feeling better. Ha, ha, Kaneko's heavy panting filled his ears. Naruto, I love you. Naruto chuckled. After getting clean in the hot spring, Naruto and Kaneko dressed and went their separate ways. Kaneko was probably going to find Ravel and Ophis. She usually spent her time with them, though he was sure that Ravel was currently baking something with Irina. They had taken over cooking breakfast most mornings. Naruto went into his room. As he shut the door behind him, he heard a rustling noise. He looked over toward the bed. It was Rias. She had been sitting on the bed, though she was now standing. Rias, he asked. She didn't answer him, not verbally. Naruto was stunned when Rias tackled him, knocking him into the door with a harsh crack. He winced as pain entered his skull. In most cases, this would have been the moment where he asked Rias why she had just slammed his head into the door, but he didn't. Rias was crying. Her sobs were muffled, and her tears were staining his shirt. Naruto did what any man, no, any person, would do in this situation. He held her in his arms. It took a while for Rias to calm down, but she did eventually, though she continued holding him tightly. Feeling better, a little. Sorry for jumping you like that. It's fine, though now I'm curious to know what made you this way. Wanna fill me in? Rias sniffled, nodded, and then backed away from him. She took his hand and led him to the bed. Once they were sitting, she explained the situation to him. She told him about how Circex and the other 3 faction leaders that went to Asgard had attacked Mount Olympus, how the Olympians were demanding that they either kill Circex and the others or risk annihilation, and how Barakiel had said they might not have a choice but to do as the Greeks asked. Naruto listened to all this with a silent calm. You didn't tell me all this because you want my opinion or sympathy, Naruto said at last. I know you. What's the plan? Nose still red, eyes still runny, Rias gave him a grim smile nonetheless. It was the kind of smile that was filled with determination. However, it had hints of defeatism, probably because whatever her plan entailed could end in everyone being killed or something similar. We're going to save them, she began, but we can't do it alone. We need help. Then, that's right. Rias nodded and took a deep breath. We're going to ask all of the people who fought in the raiding games for their aid. Devil Ninja. With Rias' decision made, there was nothing for Naruto to consider. Not only could he not stop her if he wanted to, but he didn't want to, not when the matter involved the lives of 6 leaders of the 3 factions alliance. However, gathering allies was not the easiest of tasks. There was Sona and her peerage, of course, and all it took for Rias to convince them to join her was letting Sona know what their plan was. However, the others would not only be more difficult to convince, they were tougher to reach. 3 of them were in heaven. Devils could not reach heaven, unless they had a death wish. The divine powers that infused heaven would kill even an ultimate-class devil. The person that Rias went to see was Saraorg Bale, the one given the title of the strongest youth. If they were going to mount a rescue operation, then they would need the most powerful of their generation. That meant adding Saraorg, who was definitely among the top contenders for most powerful, and his peerage, to the team. Taking a trip to the underworld was no simple matter. Rias had to pull many strings to get passage to the underworld, and then they went straight from her estate to the Bale clan's estate without pausing even a minute to rest. Saraorg was already aware of their impending arrival. Someone would be receiving them when they got off the train. The train they were taking was the same one they had used to get to the underworld the first time around. Naruto was sitting on a couch by a large glass panel, looking out over the world while stroking Rias' hair as she lay on the same couch with her head on his lap. That was normally Kaniko's or Ophus's spot, but they had conceded it to Rias. So kind of them. Anyway, running his fingers through her hair was calming, and it seemed to help her remain calm, so it was a win-win situation. Asia and Issei, who were sitting on a couch immediately opposite them, were also looking out the window. "When do you think we'll be in Bale clan grounds?" asked Asia. "I believe we just passed the border a few minutes ago," Akino said as she came up beside them. "The Bale clan doesn't have as much land as the Grimoire clan," Rias added. Her eyes were still closed as she remained where she was, leaning into Naruto's hand as he continued stroking her hair. "But that's because they're a smaller clan. Since there are less members, and less of their members own a peerage, their lands are smaller because they don't need as much." "I guess that makes sense." Issei scratched his head. "I'll be honest, all this devil politics and stuff still has me confused as fuck." "You'll understand it eventually," Akino smiled, "especially if you want to have your own peerage." A little ways off from where they were sitting, Kaniko and Gasper were playing a game of cards at a round table. Kaniko held a hand over one of Gasper's cards, watched as his expression fell, then switched to another card and watched as his face lit up. She went back to the other card and took it, grinning triumphantly when Gasper tears started leaking from the eye holes of his paper bag. Meanwhile, Kiba was polishing his blade. Only the Grimoire peerage was there right now. Ophus was getting in contact with Team Valley, Irina had gone back to heaven to ask Angelus, Israel, and Rule for help, and Rainier was traveling to the Fallen Angels section of the underworld to request aid from Boar, Gomeri, Lix Tetrax, and Mestama. Sona and Ravel were meeting with Zephyrdor and Seekvera respectively. With luck and some effort, they would be able to form a large group to rescue Sirzex and the others. The train pulled into a station, one that wasn't as large as the Grimoire clan's train station, and the Grimoire peerage exited the train. They were met by a small entourage. The people, a trio of butlers, took them to a carriage that would drive them to the Bale estate. Naruto had come to expect large estates from devil clans. That was probably why he was surprised when, instead of appearing before a large estate, they were taken to a small house. A really small house. It only consisted of a single story, and while it had more space than a traditional one-story house, it was nothing compared to the massive mansions that the Grimoire and Phoenix clans owned. Is this really the Bale clan estate?" asked Naruto. "No, it isn't," Rias said. "This is Saraorg's personal home. He likes to live away from the Bale clan, since he and they don't get along very well." "Ah, Master Saraorg is waiting for you all in here," one of the butlers said, opening a door and gesturing for them to enter. "Thank you," Rias said, walking past the group as though she was used to not being presented with opulence. Since Rias wasn't disconcerted by the lack of wealth, Naruto didn't let it bother him and followed Rias inside with the others. What he found was a basic hallway that led into a living room-kitchen combination. The floor of the living room was lowered into the ground, covered in white carpet, and looked like a gamer's paradise. There were a bunch of soft couches and bean bags littering the area. A large flat-screen TV sat embedded into the wall, and there were a number of video game consoles, including some of the next-generation consoles that Rias owned. All the members of Saraorg's peerage were present, except for Regulus. They sat on the lounge chairs and bean bags. Coriana and Mestita were playing a fighting game of some sort. Street fighters, it looked like. The others were either watching them or doing their own thing. However, when he and the others entered, everyone turned to look at them. "Rias," Saraorg said, standing up from the armchair he'd been sitting in. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon after you returned to the human world." Rias smiled, though it was one without joy. "Saraorg, I'd love to say that this is a social visit, but I think you know that's not the case." Saraorg nodded. "Something has happened. I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of unrest here in the underworld. I'm guessing you know what's going on. Probably more than you, but I don't know everything." Rias sighed. "You might want to sit down. This explanation is going to take some time." Saraorg listened as Rias explained what happened to her brother and the other 3 faction leaders. It wasn't just Saraorg who listened. His whole peerage paid close attention to what was being said, and Regulus had returned from wherever he'd been when his king called him. Since Naruto had heard all of this several times already, he focused more on the expressions of those hearing about it the first time. "That's definitely a problem." Saraorg leaned back and crossed his arms. "Honestly, if you were anyone else, I'm not sure I'd believe you, but I know you aren't the type to joke when it comes to matters like this." "We're planning to save them, but we need help," Rias confided, finally getting to the point of their visit. "Saraorg, will you help us?" Saraorg grinned in response to that question. "Do you need to ask? Our leaders are in danger, and you are asking me to go on a dangerous mission that will show off the strength of myself and my peerage. Of course we'll help." "That's great," Rias said. "However, there is something I want." Rias paused. "What's that?" Saraorg pointed at Naruto. "I want to fight you. One-on-one." Shrugging, Naruto said, "Once we've rescued our leaders, I'll be more than happy to kick your ass." Barking with laughter, Saraorg grinned fiercely. "That's the kind of response I was looking for." There were a few more details that they needed to work out, so Rias spoke over the specifics with Saraorg. What it basically came down to was this. They were going to put together a team, but they were waiting to hear back from Sona, Revel, Rainier, and Irina. When that happened, everyone would meet at their mansion in the human world, and they would hash out a plan to rescue the 3 faction alliance leaders. Naruto only paid a little attention to the conversation. It wasn't anything that he didn't already know, so he spent more time stroking Kaniko's cat ears. However, even touching Kaniko's lovely and soft cat ears couldn't stop him from worrying. The Grimoire peerage eventually left after getting Saraorg to promise that he and his peerage would meet them in the human world in 2 days' time. They had selected 2 days because it took at least 1 day to reach the human world without teleportation, which most people couldn't just use on a whim. Naruto had found out earlier that Riser teleporting himself into Rias's clubhouse had been met with a harsh scolding from his parents via Revel. As he sat on the train that would take them back to the Grimoire estate, Naruto wondered how Revel was doing. He hoped she'd managed to convince that stubborn asshole Zephyr to at least consider meeting with them. Devil Ninja. After everyone returned home, the girls convened in the large hot spring as a means of relaxing and bonding with their fellow females. Boys weren't allowed. Rias sat on a bench inside of the hot spring. She watched Kaniko play with Revel and Ophis for a while, but she wasn't really in the mood to enjoy their antics today. Exhaustion was seeping into her bones. Ever since she had learned about what was happening to her brother, what her brother and the other faction leaders had done under Loki's command, she'd been working non-stop on getting everything ready for a rescue operation. "You look like you're thinking deep thoughts," a voice said in her ear. Sona, Rias greeted as the student council president of Kuo Academy sat down on her left. Her friend and rival retained a composed expression as she glanced at the members of their combined peerages, towel barely covering her modesty, but if one knew her as Rias did, they would know the signs of nervousness. Sona's left leg bounced up and down. Her eyes were slightly twitchy. Her right index finger was playing a staccato rhythm against her knee. "Did your meeting with Sikvera not go well?" Sona raised a hand as though to adjust her glasses, but then she seemed to remember that she had left them with her clothes. She lowered her hand and sighed. "It went fine. Sikvera has agreed to meet with us. That's one less thing to worry about." "Are you guys talking about how your meetings went?" asked Irina as she wandered up to them. "That's right. Rias nodded as Irina sat down on her right. Speaking of, how did your meetings go? They were good, Irina chirped. Everyone agreed to meet us. They'll be here in 2 days. That was a load off Rias's shoulders. She'd been under the impression that the angels and the fallen would be the hardest to convince, but thanks to Irina and Rainier, everyone had agreed to at least meet them at this house in 2 days' time. Rias hoped that would give her enough time to create several strategies that she could propose. Of course, the ultimate strategy they came up with would be one that all of them agreed on. Even if everyone agreed with one she presented, it would likely be changed several times to suit individual tastes, but that was also why she was making several. If one of them didn't appeal to everyone, another might. Speaking of, I'll have to convene with Sona and Ravel to create our strategies. Sona was her polar opposite when it came to creating strategies. Where Rias preferred bold strategies that allowed her to face the enemy head-on, Sona liked using deception and misdirection, so she'd be able to point out any flaws in her plans. Ravel, on the other hand, seemed to have mastered the art of managing and convincing people. She still had no idea how the girl had convinced that hard-head Zephyr to meet with them, and her strategies were also impressive. She had been Riser's strategist. Were it not for Naruto being her wild card, Rias might have lost that match. Steam rose all around them as Rias and the other girls of hers and Sona's peerage continued to relax. It would likely be the last time they did this for a while. Devil Ninja, everyone was present. The 2 devils, Seekvera and Zephyr, were standing near the back with their respective peerages. While Seekvera merely had a calm demeanor and seemed intent on observing the proceedings, Zephyr was glaring at Ravel like he wanted to burn a hole through her head. He wondered what that was all about. Angelus was standing next to Saraorg, and while the youngest of her aces was looking hatefully at the strongest youth, Angelus seemed quite content in the powerful devil's presence. The other 2 angels sat scattered around the office. Israel sat on the couch, sipping the tea that Akino had so graciously provided. His peerage was gathered around him. Rule stood as far from the devils as possible. There was also Bor, Gomeri, Lix Tetrax, and Mestama. While Lix Tetrax was standing right up front, Bor and Mestama had chosen spots near the back. Gomeri was on the couch opposite Israel. Unlike the angels and devils, their peerages were not with them, since the fallen did not have a true peerage system installed. Naruto stood behind Rias, on her left, the opposite side that Akino was standing. He could spot the Grimoire peerage throughout the room. Asia and Issei were sitting with Rainier, who silently hovered over them like an overprotective mother. Kaneko was sitting on Irina's lap. Now that was a surprise. Thankfully, Irina didn't seem to mind. Gasper was hidden in a corner. All these people were probably making him nervous. On the other hand, Kiba stood beside Lix Tetrax, who, Naruto noticed, was absently looking at the handsome blonde with interest. Outside of the Grimoire peerage, Rossweiss was also present, though she remained unobtrusive, standing several meters from everyone else with her arms crossed. Ravel was next to Kaneko and Irina. Really, the only one he didn't see was. Something warm entered his hand. Naruto looked down at the hand that was now holding his, followed the hand up the arm, the slender shoulder, and onto the face of Ophis, slightly more mature, a little taller, and with bigger breasts. He didn't know what was going on with Ophis, but she had been changing her appearance slightly as the days went by. Sometimes she would be taller. Other times she would have larger breasts. The only thing that never changed was her face. Regardless of what change she made, she'd always come to him for his opinion. Naruto gave it, of course. He figured she was trying to find out what sort of appearance he liked the best, and he couldn't deny that he had his preferences. Rias was first in his heart. Her appearance was exactly what he loved, but it would be a lie to say that she was the only beauty who got his motor running. He wouldn't get such a serious hard-on for Kaneko and Ravel if that had been the case. Ophis was now slightly taller than Kaneko but shorter than Ravel. Her hair remained long and black, and her face hadn't changed from its lowly appearance. She'd also given herself bigger breasts. They were between Ravel and Kaneko, again, and they fit her well. She was difficult to look at in public because she was still wearing that black tape over her nipples and nothing else to cover them, but he figured it was just what she liked wearing. So long as he didn't look, he wouldn't get a boner. "Thank you all for coming," Rias said. "I know that everyone here is busy, so I'll get right to the point. 6 leaders of the 3 factions alliance went to Asgard over a month ago and were defeated, placed under Loki's control. The fuck do you mean they were placed under Loki's control? Zephyr was the first to speak. I mean just that, Rias replied. Loki somehow got his hands on a device that can control other people, regardless of their power, and he's using that device to control Circex, Michael, Azazel, Seraphol, Gabrielle, and Shemhazai. How is that even possible? Asked Angelus. A device that controls people. I mean no disrespect, but it seems impossible for something like that to exist. The devices are powered by Nature Chakra. Naruto fielded this question. I'm not sure what any of you know of Nature Chakra, but the basics is that it's the energy that permeates the world. This means that it's powered by the world's power, which is thousands of times stronger than any one angel, devil, or fallen angel. It wouldn't be that hard to control someone, even an ultimate class devil, with this power. This is also how Loki gained control of Asgard, Rosweiss suddenly spoke up. After Loki killed Odin and took control of Asgard, he forced these collars onto us, which put everyone under his direct control. We were still conscious of what we were doing, but we couldn't do anything to resist. Even our strongest Asgardians were helpless. Most of those living in Asgard were gods. Their powers were undeniable, and thanks to the strength of their pantheon, which was one of the strongest, they were even more powerful than most other gods and goddesses. The only people of Asgard who were not gods were the heroes and the Valkyries like Rosweiss. However, even they had strength that was on par with the gods. Rias had once put them near the top in terms of individual strength. She said they were stronger than most people in the 3 Christian factions, people like the Maus and Archangels being the exception, and that any one Asgardian could defeat an entire army of devils on their own. That this device could control even gods was cause for alarm. You mentioned before that the leaders of the 3 factions alliance have been subdued by this device, Sikvera prodded Rias to continue. It's more problematic than that, Rias said. Circex, Seraphol, Michael, Gabrielle, Azazel, and Shemhazai attacked the Greek pantheon just 3 days ago. The Greek pantheon was hands down one of the most powerful pantheons. The power of faith, of belief, of the acknowledgement of their existence, was what gave a pantheon its strength. The more followers a pantheon had, the more people who believed in them, the stronger they became. However, it was also a matter of longevity. While Christianity had the most followers, the Greek pantheon was one of the oldest surviving religions, dating back to before the new calendar. What's more, there were numerous fictional stories and literature written about them. This gave the Greek pantheon more strength than even Christianity. It was said that their top 3 gods, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades had powers that were stronger than all of the 3 factions of the Bible. In other words, picking a fight with them was suicide. Are you sure that is what really happened? Asked Israel, his eyes wide. Rias closed her eyes and nodded. This information comes from Metatron and Barakiel. We can trust it. I can't believe this has happened, Mestama muttered. All of our leaders are being controlled and attacking the Greek pantheon. It gets worse, Rias continued, her tone grim. The Greeks have given us an ultimatum. Either we kill the 3 factions' leaders, or they will declare war on us and eradicate all 3 factions. It was an understatement to say they were in a bad way. This was essentially a death sentence. Their leaders were the only thing keeping this alliance together, and without that alliance, they did not have the power to survive anymore. It was like asking them whether they preferred a slow death or a quick one. Before we begin to panic, I believe Rias has a plan, Saraorg said just as everyone was about to start freaking out. He gestured to the redhead. Rias, I believe now is the time to unveil your plan to us. You are right, Rias said. I have several plans, of course. We'll select the one that has the best chance of succeeding, and modify it to suit our strengths. Selecting a plan was a lot harder than it sounded. While everyone, even Zephyr, agreed that they needed to do something, it seemed as if no one could decide on what they should do. Someone always had something to say, some complaint to make. It only seemed to get worse as time went on. The more plans Rias proposed, the fewer people who sided with her, until they even started questioning her abilities as a king. Rias, to her credit, accepted their criticisms with aplomb, stating that while none of them were the most ideal plans, they were the only ones that had a chance of success. "All of you need to be quiet." A shout suddenly interrupted all of the arguing. It was, surprisingly, Ravel who had done the shouting. "What was that, Chibi?" Zephyr glared at her. "You wanna go? You picking a fight? If you'd like me to reveal what your hobby is to everyone here, I suggest you back off," Ravel said. HRK. As Zephyr paled and stopped talking, Ravel moved to the front of the office and turned to face everyone there. "All of you are arguing about whether any of these plans will work, but none of you have even proposed a single plan of your own. Rias, Sona, and I carefully went through every plan we could think of and selected these ones because they have the highest possibility of working. They were made specifically to play to each of your strengths. Now, it's fine if you don't like any of them, but unless you have your own plan, I suggest each of you shut up and listen because right now you all sound like a bunch of idiots." Naruto was impressed with how Ravel put everyone in their place. Those gathered were so silent now that he could have heard a pin drop, and what's more, they didn't seem capable of even forming words. A few of them were just soundlessly moving their mouths, as if they wanted to say something but couldn't. "Finally, I don't really have a problem with your plans," Saraorg said. "My only real concern is that the majority of these plans hinge on those two." He pointed at Naruto and Ophis, who were still holding hands. Ravel looked back at them, glanced at Naruto, and then squeaked and looked away. Naruto sighed. It seemed she still couldn't look at him for some reason. He didn't know why, but she had been avoiding him for the past few days. "She's been masturbating to you," Ophis said. "Excuse me?" Naruto asked. Ravel. Ophis nodded at the girl with blonde drills. "Every night, she's been masturbating while calling out your name. I think she's too embarrassed to face you." I did not know that. So that's what was happening. Well, he guessed it was good to know that the reason Ravel couldn't look at him was because she was embarrassed about masturbating to him, but now came the question of what he should do about it. Should he confront her? Should he wait for her to come to him? Whatever he decided, he should make a decision today. They'd be leaving soon, and it was better to resolve matters like this while they still had the chance. "Thank you for telling me," he said after a moment. Ophis nodded. "After we rescue those faction leaders, you owe me a date." Naruto blinked, and then nodded. "Okay, sure. After we rescue Searzex and the others, I'll go on a date with you. I'll hold you to that." While Naruto and Ophis were having their own conversation, Rias defended them. "The reason we're relying on these two is because of their powers. Ophis is the Ouroboros dragon, the immortal dragon god. Out of all of us, she's the only one capable of taking out an entire pantheon by herself. Likewise, Naruto has a power sealed inside of him that is close to being on par with Ophis. We have no choice but to rely on that power." "Okay, point." Saraorg looked at Naruto and frowned as though wondering if what Rias said was true. He probably didn't like the idea that Naruto was holding back his power. "However, you are saying that they are going to take on the Asgardians and Greeks by themselves. Isn't that a little much, even for them?" Rias shrugged. "What do you want me to say? We can't afford to fight either Asgard or Greece. We'll need the majority of us to confront our own leaders and wrest those mind control devices off of them. All 6 of our leaders are strong enough to take 1, 2, or even 3 of us out with little effort. To beat them and force those devices off, we'll need to team up on them." "I guess that's true." Saraorg sighed. "All right, I concede your point. Does anyone else have anything they wish to say regarding this plan?" asked Rias. When no one spoke up, she nodded. "All right, let's all sit down and determine how we're going to divide our forces." Devil Ninja. The meeting had ended and everyone decided to stay at the Grimoire mansion. They would be leaving tomorrow, so it only made sense. Dinner had been a bit of a hassle. Naruto, Rias, and Irina had been forced to cook for everyone. Naruto had to create several clones to do some grocery shopping because they ran out of ingredients halfway through, but outside of that, it went well enough. It was later at night, and Ravel was lying on her bed, feet pressed into the mattress, hips raised, and finger plunging relentlessly into her entrance. "Naruto, Naruto." She cried out Naruto's name as she did everything she could to quench the fire burning in her loins. Being a phoenix, her arousal ran much hotter than other devils. Unlike the metaphorical fire she had read about in erotica, hers was an almost literal fire. "Oh, Naruto, you feel so good inside of me, Naruto." Ravel clenched her butt cheeks as she worked out the bundle of nerves and rubbed them furiously. Jolts of electric pleasure raced through her thighs, shaking, breathing coming out in heady gasps. Ravel rode out the wave of ecstasy that caused her mind to go white. She fell back onto the bed. In spite of having reached an orgasm, Ravel found herself frowning. She raised her hand and looked at her fingers, soaked in her juices. Her fingers just weren't doing it for her anymore. She wanted Naruto plunging into her. She wanted to feel him stretching her out, to become one with him. However, Ravel was too embarrassed to ask him to have sex with her. "Ah, Naruto-sama and I are a couple. Why am I too embarrassed to ask him to sleep with me?" "I don't know," a voice said. "Why won't you ask me to sleep with you?" Ravel froze as she suddenly became aware that there was a person standing on her ceiling. It was, of course, Naruto. Who else could it be? He was just standing there, on her ceiling like he was spitting in gravity's face, arms crossed and a single eyebrow raised. Wah! Ravel's mind was screaming at her. She could feel her face growing redder by the second. He was, and her panties, and she was exposed. This was so humiliating. Wah! Her mouth moved to form words, even though her mind was locked in terrorized embarrassment. At some point, however, her mind was able to overcome her issues. Her voice rang out like a megaphone. "WWW, what are you doing here? Why are you in my room?" She paused. Then, "How long have you been there?" "I think I got here just as you were close to climaxing," Naruto admitted. "Asshole." Ravel threw a pillow at him. She would have blasted him with fire, but she didn't want to burn the mansion down. "Pervert. Lech. What were you thinking? You can't spy on a girl in her room." "Actually, I knocked several times, but you weren't answering," Naruto said as he swatted her pillow aside. "Furthermore, you've been avoiding me, so this was the only thing I could think of to make you talk to me." "I'm not going to talk to you now," Ravel screamed. Then, suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped, she looked away, incapable of even looking into his eyes, and muttered, "And you saw me, in such an embarrassing state, too." Naruto dropped from the ceiling and crouched before her. Ravel squeaked and bolted upright, moving backwards until her back hit the wall. It was probably good thing her bed rested against a wall or she'd have fallen off, though perhaps that would have been better since Naruto had crawled onto the bed and was so close their faces were almost touching. "You know, Ravel, you should tell me when you're feeling this way," Naruto whispered. I wanted to but, Ravel, also whispering, let out a soft gasp when Naruto placed a hand on her cheek. The way he stroked her skin, so tenderly, made her feel like she was melting. "You're a part of my family, and when I gain my own peerage, you're going to become a member of it, right? That'll bring us even closer." Naruto leaned forward until their foreheads were pressed together. "Rias has also given you the okay. When you want something of me, just ask. It's as you say, we're a couple. You don't need to be embarrassed to ask me for anything." Anything." Ravel swallowed. Her mouth had gone dry. "Anything," Naruto confirmed. Then I want you to touch me," she muttered. Ravel nearly panicked when Naruto slid the hand on her cheek down to her neck, but when he began rubbing his fingers into the stiff muscles around her neck and shoulders, her body unconsciously relaxed. Naruto soon left her neck. He moved his hand across her shoulder, down her arm, moving up and down until goosebumps had formed on her skin. Not there," Ravel murmured. My more intimate places. Touch me there. If that's what you want, Ravel, you only need to ask." Ravel shivered at Naruto's voice. Why did it sound so husky all of a sudden? All questions fled her mind when Naruto undid the bow that hung over her chest. As the fabric slid apart, he leaned down, grabbed the zipper that kept her jacket closed with his teeth, and pulled it down. He reached out with both hands, pulling her jacket apart and sliding it down her arms, until she was wearing just the white dress. "Scoot forward, please," Naruto said softly. He took her hands and pulled. Ravel let him. She scooted along on her butt, her dress bunching up near her hips, until her feet hung off the edge of the bed. Thanks to her short stature, she was too short to reach the floor. Naruto, now on the ground, grabbed the hem of her dress and began lifting it over her head. It was already crumpled past her butt, so lifting it was easy. "Raise your arms," he said. Ravel lifted her arms as Naruto continued raising the dress. She was keenly aware of every centimeter of exposed flesh that she was showing. Just knowing that he was seeing her like this was embarrassing, but at the same time, it was oddly satisfying. She felt content. Naruto was seeing her. He was the only man who would ever see her like this. A thought suddenly occurred to her. He might be the only man, but what about women? Kaneko had recently been getting sexually pleasured by both Naruto and Rias, sometimes just Rias. She'd once accidentally spied Rias fingering Kaneko through a crack in the door when they hadn't been careful enough. Was that going to happen to her? The thought should have been repulsive, but all she could wonder about was, would Naruto like it? Her dress came off. Ravel raised her arms to cover her bra as Naruto tossed the dress onto the floor. They didn't remain there. Naruto pulled them away from her chest. "Let me see you," he said. Ravel, her face red, stuttered, "Do you like what you see?" "Of course, but I'd like to see more." She was given no chance to respond, for Naruto leaned forward and kissed her. Ravel could do nothing but melt into the kiss. His lips were warm and soft. She felt her arousal spike as he gently nibbled on her lower lip, all the while, his hands were on her bra, deftly unhooking it, causing her chest to suddenly feel a lot less tight. The bra came away, and Ravel was left bare. She would have covered herself again, but Naruto, who continued to kiss her, pushed her onto the bed. She fell back. Naruto leaned back up and pulled off his shirt. Ravel had seen him with his shirt off before, so she was aware of how defined he was, but even so, the chiseled abs and powerfully built chest and shoulders never failed to make her yearn to touch them. "Ravel," Naruto said suddenly. She perked up. "You're so beautiful." What are you?" Hampered once more by Naruto's mouth, Ravel could do nothing but wrap her arms around him as a tongue suddenly penetrated her mouth. Warm, wet, Naruto's tongue sent sensations through her like nothing else. He played with her tongue, swirling his around hers, hooking them together. Despite that, there was an underlying gentleness about his action. It was passionate, but, to her, it also felt loving. A hand soon landed on her right breast. Ravel gasped into Naruto's mouth as fingers tweaked her nipple, which quickly stiffened into a point. The hand left, but it didn't matter, because another hand landed on her other breast and did the same thing. It felt so good. It was so amazing. Ravel's moan was muffled by her lover. The hand once more left her breast, sliding along her stomach, tickling her skin, before reaching her white panties. It didn't slip under them. It went over them, gliding along the fabric, reaching her lips and pushing down. Ravel's hips involuntarily bucked as Naruto ran his finger along her opening. The fabric of her panties were pushed into her, causing an unusual friction that felt like a static shock. As Ravel gasped again, Naruto stopped kissing her mouth in favor of her neck. While licking, sucking, and kissing her neck, he finally slipped his hand into the waistband of her panties, found her entrance, and slid a finger inside. "Naruto-sama, I feel so hot. Good. Time to make you burn even more." Ooh. Naruto was clearly more experienced than her. His fingers quickly made her entire body shudder with an orgasm. It came more quickly than she could imagine, but he wasn't done yet. Naruto brought his head to her breasts and took one of her nipples into his mouth. Ravel screamed as he gently bit down. It raced through her nerves. Ecstasy. Her mind and body were being flooded with ecstasy. Her breasts and entrance were being assaulted. It felt amazing, mind-numbing. Ravel thought she was seeing stars. There was no telling how many times she came, but she had definitely blacked out after her third or fourth orgasm. Naruto was no longer touching her. He was kneeling on the bed beside her when she finally came to. What happened?" she asked, voice slurred. "You passed out." I did. How embarrassing." "You did, but it wasn't for long." Naruto paused. "Do you want to continue?" Ravel could feel the heat spreading through her body, but she mustered up her courage and nodded. "Yes, please. Then please let me take care of you." Flashing her a quick grin, Naruto moved off the bed and knelt before her. Ravel lifted herself on her hands to look down as Naruto grabbed her black stockings. They were the only articles she had left aside from her panties. He first grabbed the left one, slid it down her leg and off her foot, and then he did the same with the right. She thought he was going to take off her panties next. However, she became confused when he grabbed her right foot and began massaging her toes. What are you doing?" she asked, suddenly nervous. Her feet were tingling, like after rubbing her socks against the carpet. "Rias and I haven't tried this yet, but I've always been curious to see how it feels after watching anime," Naruto said, bringing her foot to his face. "You'll have to let me know what you think." She would have asked what he was talking about, but then Naruto sucked her big toe into his mouth, and Ravel threw her head back as her toe was encased in a warm wetness. Amazing. It shouldn't have been possible, but somehow, as Naruto swirled his tongue around her toe, her mind blanked out as she experienced a different kind of pleasure. Naruto didn't just pleasure her big toe. He ran his mouth over all of her toes, sucking on each one, licking between them. It should have been dirty. Gross. She should have thought it was disgusting, but all she could focus on was how good it felt, especially when he ran his tongue along the soles of her feet. By the time Naruto was finished, a blushing Ravel was lying on the bed, her forearms covering her red face as she bit her lip and tried not to cry out in pleasure. The bed shifted. Naruto must have sat on it, though she couldn't see him. "Thoughts?" he asked. "Why?" she mumbled. "Why does that feel so good?" "Not sure," Naruto said. "I saw it in a hentai that Rias asked me to watch with her." "Hentai? Nothing. Anyway, Ravel," the tone of his voice made her bring her arms down, "you and I are a couple, but tonight, I would like to make you mine completely. Will you become mine?" Ravel thought she should have been blushing up a storm, but instead of being embarrassed, she wanted to cry tears of joy. "Yes, that's what I want. I want to become yours." Naruto smiled as he moved off the bed again and grabbed her panties. They were soaking wet. As he peeled them off her hips, a wet sound issued from them, as though they were stuck to her lips. When he slid her panties over her feet, he tossed them to the floor. Ravel, already knowing what was going to happen, spread her legs apart so Naruto could move between them and line himself up. As he leaned down, Naruto teased her entrance, while pressing his forehead to hers and looking into her eyes. "In return for becoming mine, I am now yours." He grinned and winked. "Please be gentle." "I'm the one who should be saying that," Ravel muttered. Naruto just kept grinning. When Naruto first entered her, it hurt. It was so unbelievably painful that Ravel cried at first. However, Naruto didn't move at all, allowing her to adjust, letting the pain fade. When he finally did begin moving, it was slowly so as not to hurt her now stretched muscles. It felt good. Ravel knew that sex was supposed to feel good, but she hadn't realized that it could feel this good. She now understood why her brother and his floozies were always fucking. Sex felt amazing. Naruto was a great lover. He seemed to know that she wanted slow and romantic over hot and passionate. His hips rocked against her and his lips sought hers in a loving kiss that made her toes curl. As he moved inside of her, as he kissed her, Naruto's hands sought hers, his fingers lacing with hers as heat slowly built up in her lower abdomen until she came. It wasn't just once either. Naruto held himself back until she had orgasmed at least twice more before letting himself go. She was a little disappointed that he pulled out, but he explained that, on the off chance that it could happen, he didn't want to risk her getting pregnant. "I'd like to have kids, but not yet." Afterward, Ravel laid against Naruto's body, enjoying his warmth as he held her to him. She fell asleep as he stroked her hair. Devil Ninja. Every woke up early the next day. After eating a quick breakfast, the group, which had become massive enough that they had to hire a bus to drive them to the airport, boarded a private jet owned by the Grimoire clan. Unfortunately, a private jet was not large enough to house over 40 people, much less the large number created by Rias, Sona, Saraorg, Seekvera, Zephyr plus their peerages, and then Angelus, Israel, and Rule plus their brave saints. To that end, they ended up taking 2 private jets. Fortunately, the Grimoire clan owned more than one jet. The flight from Japan to Greece took a total of 12 hours and 17 minutes. Their flight took them from Tokyo to Athens. They arrived at an airport, were offloaded and, after the second private jet set down, they boarded a large double-decker bus that Rias had somehow procured, which would take them to another mansion owned by the Grimoire clan. I had no idea your clan owned holdings in countries besides Japan, Naruto muttered, staring out the window. The architecture in Greece was a lot different than in Japan. While the modern buildings were similar enough, interspersed throughout them were more ancient structures built using columns and large triangle-shaped roofs. There were also a number of buildings that looked like they had a hole or sunroof in the middle. Very different. Just because I chose to live in Japan doesn't mean that the Grimoire clan only owns property in Japan, Rias said. She was sitting in the seat behind him since both his left and right were occupied by Kaneko and a very cuddly Ravel. Consequently, Ophis was sitting on his lap. It was a lot harder to deal with because she no longer looked like a child. Huh, I suppose I should have guessed that. Bucho lives in Japan because she's a weeaboo. What? I am not a weeaboo. Rias shouted, blushing beet red from the roots of her hair down to her neck. That's a very misguided term, Ravel said. It implies that Rias-sama thinks she's Japanese, but I'm pretty sure that Rias-sama is content being a devil. She just likes watching anime. That technically makes her an otaku. I'm not that either. Then, a Japanophile. No. Naruto would have chuckled at how Rias was being double-teamed by Kaneko and Ravel. Unintentionally on Ravel's part though it was, but he couldn't because Ophis chose that moment to squirm against him. You have a boner, she said. Naruto blushed as Kaneko and Ravel turned to him. Now that she and he had finally had sex for the first time, she seemed a lot more confident, which explained why she immediately zeroed in on the spot between Ophis' thighs. I wish you wouldn't have said anything, he muttered as he realized that it wasn't just Kaneko and Ravel who were staring at him. Lix Tetrax, Angelus, and Saraorg, who sat in front of him, and Issei, Asia, and Rainier, who sat on the seat opposite him, were also staring, as though she could see his erection. Does having me sit on you in this form make you horny? Asked Ophis with a completely straight face. Okay, I believe that's enough out of you. If so, then I guess that means this form is a success. After our date, we will have to experiment by engaging in intercourse. Could you please stop talking? By the time they arrived at the Grimoire estate in Athens, which looked a lot like a Greek temple, Naruto and Rias were both thoroughly red in the face. He didn't know if that had been their intent. However, neither of them could look at anyone else for the longest time. It only became worse when the people who'd ridden in the other two buses that had ferried them through Athens asked about why they were blushing. Naruto realized that it was a very good thing the Grimoire clan's mansions were so freaking huge. They wouldn't have been able to house so many people at the same time otherwise. Everyone was able to have their own separate room, should they choose it, though Naruto ended up getting a room with Rias, Kaneko, Ravel, and Ophis. He thanked the ramen gods for the large bed. Dinner that night was prepared by a host of professional chefs, and it was traditional Greek cuisine. Naruto had never eaten Greek cuisine, so it was interesting to try out the host of different foods. He didn't know what half of this stuff was called. Some of it looked like pasta with a layer of melted cheese on top. There were these triangle-shaped bread thingies with more cheese stuffed inside of them. There was salads and meats and kebabs. All of it was delicious, and Naruto nearly ate himself into a coma. As the day wore down to a close, everyone went through one last briefing before retiring for bed. The flight had given everyone their jet lag, which not even angels, devils, or fallen angels seemed capable of resisting. Naruto was probably the only one still up. He had tried going to sleep, of course, but it was really hard when he's surrounded by 4 beautiful and naked women. Several thighs caressed his stiffy, and Kaneko had taken to licking him in her sleep. It got even worse when someone's hand wrapped around his shaft. Everyone was too tired to have sex. That meant Naruto was basically lying in bed with a boner that could cut through diamond. It was not a fun experience. That was why he'd decided to take a bath. Like every other bathhouse that the Grimoire clan owned, the one in this Athens mansion was massive to the point of being ridiculous. It looked like a traditional Greek bath from ancient times. Shaped like a square, several columns lined the bath, which had stone steps leading into it. There were a number of aqueducts from which hot water flowed like waterfalls. Naruto didn't know if they were there for a reason or aesthetics. As he was lounging in the pool, for he couldn't call it a bath, someone else walked in. He heard their footsteps before they appeared. It was Irina, clad in nothing but a towel, The girl with golden brown hair stepped into the room. She stopped upon seeing him. Naruto, she squeaked before, quite suddenly, looking down at herself. It was interesting to see her realize that she was naked, shriek, and then crouch down to cover herself. Irina. Naruto was a lot more calm. Couldn't sleep either. No, Irina admitted, still covering herself. Would you like me to get out? Asked Naruto. Irina shook her head. Why, you were here first. I'll get out. You don't have to, Naruto said. Since you're already here, why don't you join me? Irina hesitated. If it helps, I'll close my eyes. Oh, no, that's okay. Slowly standing up, Irina wandered into the pool, sitting down about half a meter from him. I trust you not to, look. Naruto smiled, though he didn't turn his head. He didn't want to make Irina uncomfortable. Are you worried about what's going to happen? He asked. Why, yes, Irina admitted. There's just no telling how this is going to turn out. Our strongest leaders are being controlled, and we're being expected to fight them and free them from that control. I'm afraid all of us will be killed before we can even get close to accomplishing our goals. That's a valid concern. Also, I'm being forced to fight Michael-sama. Naruto heard a loud clap, which he guessed was Irina clasping her hands together. Oh, Michael-sama, what sort of cruel fate is forcing me to fight you? Is this a test from God? Is it? Naruto chuckled. I'm sure everything will turn out fine. If nothing else, you won't be fighting alone. You've got a lot of people backing you up. Irina calmed down. I'm surprised you're not nervous. We might be going up against our own leaders, but you're going to be facing an entire pantheon alone. How are you not frightened by that? That's a good question, Naruto said. I guess it's because I know that I'm fighting for a cause greater than myself. In order to keep this peaceful life of mine, I need to fight, and I need to win. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared, but being scared isn't going to stop me from kicking ass and protecting the people I love. Rather, it's because I'm protecting the people I love that I plan to kick so much ass. Irina giggled, probably at his profanity. Protecting the people you love, huh? Sounds nice. She paused. Am I one of those people you love? What are you talking about? Naruto finally turned to Irina and gave the girl his biggest, brightest grin. Of course you are. I love you very much. Irina croaked before, with a squeak similar to that of a mouse. She turned away. Don't look this way, Naruto. You can see everything. As Irina panicked and turned into a blushing, stuttering mess, Naruto laughed uproariously like a madman. Who knew that seeing Irina blush like this could be so therapeutic? Chapter 32, Pantheon Battles. The next morning was the big one. After a large breakfast, everyone moved out. Rias and the others, that being everyone who wasn't Naruto and Ophis, were traveling to Mount Olympus. Their job was to wait for the three faction alliance leaders, head them off before they could attack Mount Olympus, and defeat them by using their overwhelming numerical advantage. There were 6 faction leaders being controlled. Rias and her peerage minus Naruto made 8 people. They, along with Irina, Rainier, Revel, and Rossweiss to make 12, were going up against Searzex. Likewise, the other peerages and brave saints were going to take on one of the 3 factions' leaders. Sona and her peerage were taking on Seraphol, Saraorg was fighting against Michael with his peerage, Seekvera would fight Azazel, Israel and Angelus were up against Gabrielle, and Zephyr was going to fight against Shemhazai. The 4 fallen angels, Gomeri, Lix Tetrax, Bor, and Mestama would join Zephyr in fighting their leader. Naruto and Ophis were already gone, having left together earlier that morning. Their job was different. Naruto was going to deter Olympus should they decide to get in the way. Ophis was going to kill Loki. Mount Olympus was the highest mountain in Greece. Located close to an inlet in the Aegean Sea, the closest city to Mount Olympus was Larissa. The mountain was surrounded by several small villages. Unlike Athens, which was a combination of modern and ancient architecture, these villages appeared far older, with architecture that looked like it belonged in the early 1900s. Rias and the others had chosen to remain at the Olympus Ski Center, which, much to the dismay of all the devils minus Saraorg and his peerage, was just a rundown hut made of bricks and had a thatched red roof. At least the inside had couches, carpet, and a fireplace. However, In all regards, the place they were staking out was threadbare enough that no devil would willingly put up with it unless they had no choice. I can't believe we're staying in a place like this, Zephyr complained. This place doesn't even have a fucking espresso machine. And I'm cold. Where's the heater? Stop complaining, Sikvera grumbled, holding a cup of steaming warm tea that Akino had made for them. We're all miserable. The last thing we need is to hear you bitching. Che, shut the fuck up, you cunt. You're the one who needs to shut up. This back and forth continued for some time, with the fallen angels watching the duo as they took bets on whether or not it would come to blows. The pairs' peerages didn't help either. They actually began taking bets with the fallen angels. Fortunately, before it actually could come to blows, Saraorg stopped the two from continuing. I know how you two feel, but we should be focusing on preparing ourselves for battle. We'll be fighting against the strongest people in our faction. We can't afford to waste energy arguing here. I know that, Zephyr muttered as he turned his head. My apologies, Baal Sama, Sikvera said, cheeks lighting up. I spoke out of turn. It's all right. Let's just do our best to remain calm. A storm is coming, and I'd rather go into it with a clear head. Saraorg walked back to Angelus, who smiled at him as he crossed his arms and sighed. You're very charismatic. Huh, you think so? Angelus nodded. Yes, I'm always impressed by how you can stop fights so easily. Aha, thank you. Saraorg scratched the back of his head. The young boy next to Angelus, who always hovered around her, was grinding his teeth. Ravel took all this in with a seemingly calm gaze. However, while she presented a calm exterior, inside she was anything but. Her mind was a raging maelstrom of worry. She sat beside Kaneko, Irina, Rosweiss, and Rias. The other members of the Grimoire peerage were scattered around the building. Asia and Issei were with Rainier and Akino. The fallen angel was poking fun of Akino about something, who was responding with adequate sarcasm, though Ravel couldn't hear what was being said. Gasper was hiding behind Kiba. It seemed he was using the pretty boy as a shield, while said pretty boy spoke with Tsubaki, Sona's queen. While Rosweiss discussed magical theory with Rias, Irina and Kaneko remained mostly unobtrusive. Want some? Kaneko suddenly asked, holding out a bar of some kind of milk candy to Ravel. Oh, thank you, Ravel murmured, taking the candy and nibbling on it. You're nervous. It wasn't a question. We're using one of the plans that I came up with, so I'm confident that it's the best plan we have, Ravel began. However, we're going up against 6 of the most powerful leaders in our alliance. Some of them have the strength of an ultimate-class super devil. Even though my plan is sound, the fact remains that it might not matter in the end. She was particularly worried about their upcoming battle with Sirzek's. As an ultimate-class super devil, Sirzek's powers made him one of the strongest beings in the entire world. Against someone like that, her plans might amount to nothing, for how could a plan work when it involved going up against someone who could destroy that plan simply by opposing them with overwhelming force? Don't worry too much, Rias said, stopping her conversation with Rosweiss to reassure Ravel. Your plan is a solid one. Even if it doesn't work out perfectly, I'm sure we can succeed so long as you keep watch and direct us accordingly. Ravel's role in this fight was lead strategist. She was not going to fight. She was going to watch the fight and advise the others according to changes in the battlefield. The biggest problem I can see is whether or not everyone will be able to hold off Sirzek's long enough for my plan to work. Ravel bit her lip. Provided Eyes has enough time, he should be able to boost your power with his sacred gear high enough that you can theoretically take your brother on in a straight-up fight, at least, long enough to destroy the device that's controlling him. Once Sirzek's is no longer under control, freeing the others shouldn't prove as difficult. The plan that Ravel had concocted was simple. Rias Grimoire and Issei Hyudo would stay behind the fighting lines, while everyone else fought against Sirzek's. They would hold off the current Lucifer, essentially providing a distraction for Issei and Rias, who would use the boosted gear's ability to double someone's power every 10 seconds to increase Rias's power, until she was strong enough to fight Sirzek's herself. After that, the others would clear out, Rias would move in, and free her brother from Loki's control. It was a very basic plan, one that could be adapted on a whim to adjust for variables in the fight, and with Ravel providing tactical support, there was a chance for their victory. However, that chance was still low. If Ravel had to estimate what their chances for victory were, she would say they had a 1/500th shot at winning. The problem wasn't necessarily the plan either. Sirzex was just that powerful. "That's why you're our strategist," Rias said. "We all know how strong my brother is. As an ultimate class super devil, his powers are on a level of their own. I think everyone here understands that our chances for victory are low. However, they aren't zero, and if they aren't zero, then it means there is still a chance." Rias placed her hands on Ravel's shoulders. "We'll take that chance and win. I have confidence in your tactical abilities to make it so." Ravel was stunned at the amount of faith Rias had in her, but she was also happy. Her brother had always relied on her for tactical advice. However, Reiser had never really placed faith in her before. He had just used her, and then ignored her after a rating game was won. Rias was stating, unequivocally, that she had faith in Ravel's abilities. Wiping her eyes, Ravel gave Rias her best smile. "Yes, I won't let you down." Rias returned her smile. "I know you won't." Before anything else could be said, the warm moment between them was ruined when, without warning, a massive shock wave slammed into the Olympic ski center. Shouts rang through the air as the roof was ripped off by incredible force winds. Several of the people inside were also lifted off the ground and would have gone flying were it not for Saji using his sacred gear to keep everyone from shooting off. Ravel screamed as her ears were assaulted by the intense sound. She covered them in the hopes of lessening the pain, but it did little to help. It hurt. Blood was leaking from her ears, warm and wet, running down her neck. She couldn't even hear anything anymore. It was as if all sound had been muffled. When the shockwave finally ended, Ravel realized that she and Kaneko were being hugged tightly by Rias, who had projected a shield to protect them from the worst of it. Several other people had also created a shield. Rosweiss was protecting Irina. Saraorg was doing the same with his peerage and Angelus and her brave saints. Issei had protected Asia, Akino, and Rainier with an ability she didn't know he had. Meanwhile, several members of Sikvera's peerage were helping protect the others. "It looks like the battle has started," Rias murmured before speaking to everyone in a loud, commanding voice. "This is where it begins. Everyone, get ready. Once Naruto launches his assault on the Greek pantheon, we'll begin our attack and wrest our leaders from the control of Loki." Devil Ninja. Naruto floated above the battlefield, looking down with his arms crossed as the dimension that separated Mount Olympus, the real Mount Olympus, from the human world shattered under the might of Sirzex in his true form. Already, the gods and goddesses of the Greek pantheon were pouring down from their homes. He didn't know any of them. He didn't need to. His job in all this was simple: fight the Greeks and keep them from destroying Sirzex and the other leaders. Rias, her peerage, and everyone else was already on their way to the battlefield. They were nothing but tiny specks to his eyes. He estimated that they would reach the war zone in about 2 minutes. That should be plenty of time. "Are you ready, Kurama?" "Yes." "Then let's do this." Naruto had been training hard to control Kurama's immense power. It was difficult because Kurama now had a nearly infinite amount of power, but he had picked up a secret to controlling it. Sage Mode. Sage Mode was the act of gathering nature chakra to strengthen the body and chakra. Naruto had discovered that the issue wasn't mind over matter, so much as his body and chakra simply couldn't handle the pressure created by Kurama's chakra. It was trying to fill a glass with water using a fire hydrant. The power was simply so immense, flowed so quickly and was so powerful, that it caused cracks to appear, thus causing the power to leak out instead of remaining inside of him. Sage Mode fixed that. Naruto closed his eyes, held his hands together in a basic hand seal, and gathered nature chakra. Since they were near Mount Olympus, a land not only lush in nature but also filled with the power leaked from the gods of Olympus, gathering the energy was a trifle matter. He quickly entered Sage Mode. Now, maintaining his calm, Naruto kept a tight leash on his Sage Mode as Kurama's power flooded his body. He felt the transformation occurring. It was more complete than the previous times they had done this. The cloak appeared around him, his clothing turned black while golden lines appeared along the fabric, and the 2 bangs on either side of his head stood up like a pair of ears. What's more, 13 truth-seeking balls appeared behind him. Naruto wondered about the number, which was more than his usual 9, but he dismissed them. His transformation had been successful. He'd also successfully kept himself from accidentally destroying any mountains, which was good. Even so, the power that he was unleashing had caused the battle between the Greek pantheon and the three-faction alliance leaders to stop. With eyes enhanced by the power flowing through him, he could see the gods, goddesses, and faction leaders staring in his direction. He grinned and slammed his right fist into his left palm. A shock wave, small but strong, ripped through the air. Time to get this party started. Let's go, Naruto. Right. Naruto did not hesitate. Creating a sonic boom that echoed behind him, Naruto suddenly appeared immediately in front of the leader of the Greek gods, the only god who Naruto actually knew the same of. Zeus. The tall, blonde man's bronze eyes widened as he suddenly realized that Naruto was directly in front of him. He was given no time to actually do anything, however, for Naruto slammed his fist into the lightning god's chest. As Zeus disappeared, the air around them exploding as the man was sent flying like a rocket on its way to the moon, Naruto twisted his body and kicked the god who'd been closest to Zeus. Naruto didn't know who he was, some guy with a beard, but that god was sent sailing toward the ground. Naruto almost winced when the ground exploded after the god made impact with it. Like a tidal wave swelling from the sea, large chunks of earth erupted, flying into the air and spreading across the land, only to crash into the ground and cause more destruction. It was a good thing the nearest city was several dozen kilometers away, though it looked like Olympus National Park was going to take damage. Knowing that he couldn't hesitate, lest he give the gods of Olympus time to launch a counterattack, Naruto sent out his truth-seeking balls. Many of the gods scattered, though a few were knocked out of the sky. Keeping on the pressure, Naruto charged two Bijudamas in his palms and, taking aim at a pair of goddesses trying to get close to him, Naruto unleashed them. Bijudamas were made from a ratio of 8. 2 positive black chakra and negative white chakra, shaped into a ball, condensed, and then fired. His father's Rasengan was modeled after them. The attack was usually fired from the mouth. However, Naruto didn't need to create one in his mouth. A Bijudama was also incredibly destructive, capable of annihilating entire mountain ranges with a single attack. Against a person, it was basically a one-hit kill shot. Against a god or goddess, they could survive it, but they'd definitely get injured, unless they were powerful. These two goddesses, a gorgeous older woman with vanilla hair and red eyes and a silver-haired beauty wielding a bow and arrows, proved that they were more than they appeared. The older woman slashed her left hand down. The Bijudama was split in half. The other one flew backward, releasing arrows more quickly than Naruto could keep track of, until the Bijudama eventually imploded on itself. Naruto thought it was a stupid move. The Bijudama was composed of condensed chakra, which meant that when it imploded, it didn't just suddenly vanish as though it had eaten itself. It reacted violently. A massive detonated spread out from where it had been, sending all of the gods who'd been in the area flying as though they'd been struck by Great Red's massive tail. Only two people remained where they were, Naruto and the older woman. "I recognize you," the woman said at last. "You are Naruto Uzumaki, a member of Ryusuke peerage." Naruto didn't let her know how shocked he was. "I had no idea that you knew who I was." The woman smirked. "I'm not surprised, since we haven't been introduced. I am Hera, the matron of the Greek pantheon. We do not normally pay attention to your kind, but ever since the angels, devils, and fallen angels formed an alliance, some of us have decided that you were worth watching. I saw the raiding games that were being held in the underworld. I also saw you destroy the entire Colosseum." Naruto blushed. "That wasn't on purpose." "Perhaps not, but your power, in particular, has left many of us wary." As she spoke, several of the gods who'd been blown away came back and surrounded Naruto. Zeus, who had been launched who knew how far by Naruto's punch, also returned. There was a large bruise shaped like Naruto's knuckles on his chest. His face was also rather red and lightning skittered across his body. He seemed upset, though Naruto couldn't fathom why. "I'm guessing you're here to save your comrades who have attacked us," Hera continued. "Would you not do the same if our positions were reversed?" asked Naruto. "Sirzex and the others are currently under the control of Loki thanks to a device he received that uses nature chakra to manipulate the minds of others. Apparently, the entirety of Asgard is also under Loki's control. My friends and I are here to free them. We don't actually have a quarrel with you. I just can't let you fight. Naruto tilted his head. Won't you consider staying out of this? Do not make me laugh, boy. Zeus shouted, snarling. Your alliance attacked Olympus. There's no way we're going to let your kind get away with this. I assumed as much. He didn't really blame these people for being angry. Really, if he'd been the recipient of an unprovoked attack, he would have been in the same position as them. However, he hadn't been, and the people attacking them were his friends, who were under the control of a madman bent on causing the end of the world. So even though he understood where these people were coming from, he had no intention of just letting them do whatever they pleased. Raising his hand, Naruto gestured for all of the gods and goddesses now surrounding him to bring it. If you want to get to Circex and the others, then you'll have to go through me, he declared. You can come one at a time or all at once. It won't stop me from kicking all your asses. Devil Ninja. Revel did not partake in the battle when it started. She floated high above the battleground so as to better observe how all of the variables were interacting with each other. Rias's peerage as they fought, Circex and his powers, Rosweiss, Irina, and Rainier, and any unknowns who might become embroiled in the conflict. Information in this battle would be key. Far below her, numerous battles were taking place, the clashes causing small starbursts and explosions and sonic booms that created fierce winds, which even she could feel from up there. Rias and her peerage had engaged Circex, while the other angels, devils, and fallen angels had become embroiled in battles with their respective targets. Further away, Naruto was defending himself from all sides against an entire pantheon of Greek gods. She would be lying if she said she wasn't worried. However, her boyfriend seemed to be keeping the Greeks on their toes. Revel couldn't actually see Naruto. All she caught were flashes of light. It was as if he was teleporting all around the battlefield. Occasionally, one or more of the gods would get smacked away and go flying. Sometimes there were massive explosions, and every now and then, the ground beneath them was destroyed. Already several cracks and abrasions were appearing far below, creating canyons where Mount Olympus had once stood. She could see Rias and Issei floating far to the back, side by side. Issei had placed a hand on Rias's shoulder, the hand with the boosted gear, and he was using his boost ability to double Rias's power every 10 seconds. She didn't know how powerful Rias would need to become, but Revel had determined that she would need at the very least, 5 minutes worth of being boosted to be a match for her brother. Kiba. Irina is having trouble. Provide backup. Akeno. Lay suppressive fire for Kiba. Keep Circex-sama occupied. Kaneko. Go in from above. Hit him with a heel drop when he's not looking. Revel narrowed her eyes as she watched the battle play out, directing the forces of the Grimoire peerage combined with Rosweiss, Irina, and Rainier. She was doing her best to keep their side from being overwhelmed. The problem was that Circex was simply too powerful for normal devils to fight against. Kiba went in to defend for Irina, while Akeno sent lightning at Circex from below. The lightning was blocked. Kiba's sword was also destroyed when it came into contact with Circex's powers of destruction. Before he could pull back, Kiba's hand was likewise reduced to subatomic particles. As he screamed in shock and pain, Kaneko came in from above, descending like a missile on Circex's head. Her hand was blocked by his forearm, but her strength was such that he was launched toward the ground. They had maybe half a second's reprieve. Asia. Heal Kiba. Gasper. Stop Circex-sama's left hand. Rainier. Use your light spears to distract him. It wasn't long before Circex flew back up to engage them again. Gasper used Forbidden Blur View to stop Circex's left hand from moving, though he couldn't do so for more than 0.2 seconds. It was enough. During that time, Rainier threw a light spear at Circex, which struck his back. No damage was done. Circex was too powerful for a weak angel like Rainier to hurt, but it did push him forward, which was all they needed right then. Akeno. Rosweiss. Akeno and Rosweiss stood side by side, hands out, palms pointed toward Circex. While Akeno generated a massive amount of lightning that surged from her fingertips, Rosweiss generated a lot of water, which combined with Akeno's lightning to create an intense beam of white energy that blasted Circex in the face. Or it should have. Revel groaned when Circex merely raised his hand and swatted the attack as though it were a fly on the wall. The beam of condensed energy careened toward the ground. It struck, causing a massive explosion that rearranged a good portion of the landscape. Fierce winds struck Ravel, who shielded herself from it using her family's fire attribute to create a barrier. She couldn't afford to look away from this fight. Akeno and Rossweiss, keep up the long-range bombardment. Move around to present a harder target. Kiba and Irina, flank him. Kaneko and Rainier, work with Gasper to create an opening for Kiba and Irina. Gasper continued to use Forbidden Blur View from a distance, even going so far as to activate his balance breaker to increase his power. It didn't do much. However, with balance breaker, he was able to slow Searzex's reactions by a fraction of a second. Sometimes, a fraction of a second was all a person needed. Kaneko slammed into Searzex first. She struck him in the face with both feet. A sonic boom echoed like a thunderclap as the Super Devil was sent flying, right into Rainier, who stabbed at him with her light spear. The spear, sadly, didn't do anything, and Searzex merely swiped his hand and used his powers of destruction to cut Rainier's arm off. Asia, heal her. While Rainier fell, Asia used her newly awakened ability to heal from a distance to restore Rainier's arm. It was a gruesome sight. Ravel was fortunate that she had grown used to violence thanks to participating in her brother's raiding games. While Asia healed Rainier, Kiba and Irina had double-teamed Searzex. Kiba was using Ascalon, the holy sword that Michael had given to Issei. His own demonic holy sword, created by the sacred gear, Sword Birth, was not powerful enough to even scratch Searzex, but that sword was another story. Meanwhile, Irina used Excalibur Mimic to attack. Sadly, Excalibur Mimic was only a small piece of the true Excalibur and therefore not very powerful. Searzex didn't even get injured by it, and Irina was nearly killed when Searzex rained his powers of destruction on her. Irina moved out of the way before dying, but the attack annihilated half of her face and a good portion of her left wing. Searzex then turned on Kiba, but Ravel directed Rossweiss to activate a shield that adequately saved him, while Akeno sent more lightning at the current Lucifer to create a distraction. Asia, Irina needs you. As Asia began to heal Irina, Ravel bit her teeth in frustration. This battle had only gone on for 30 seconds, and they were already being pummeled. Those 5 minutes felt further away than ever. Devil Ninja. Saraorg and his peerage were fighting against Michael. It had been determined that they would fight Michael because he was the second strongest among the 3 faction leaders. Fortunately, they only had to contend with Michael. It made things a lot easier. While Michael was said to wield powers akin to a super devil, was an expert in magic, and knew more light magic than most others, Saraorg was confident that he and his peerage could keep this man occupied. Saraorg did not inherit the Bale clan's powers of destruction like his cousin Rias had. To that end, he had trained his body to surpass every physical limit that most people, be they devil or human, placed on themselves. It was this physical strength that earned him the title of the strongest youth. His body was both extremely durable and incredibly powerful. He used those to his advantage in this fight. Saraorg had already equipped Regulus, the Nemean lion that had been sealed inside of the Longinus Regulus Nemea. Not only was he already equipping it, but he was using Regulus's most powerful form, Regulus Ray Leather Rex Imperial Purpure. Otherwise known as Breakdown the Beast, this technique gave him the power to match a Satan-class devil for a limited amount of time. Considering he was going up against the Archangel Michael, he thought it a prudent decision. A massive spear of light easily 10 times his height raced toward him, but Saraorg roared like a beast and smashed his fist into the light spear. He gnashed his teeth together, strained his limbs, and then shattered the attack, which sent streaks of light in every direction. His fist was smoking. So even in this form, I'm still no match for Michael. It was obvious, but disappointing at the same time, though it also made him glad that he was not fighting Michael alone. Coriana created numerous spears of ice that she sent at Michael. They shattered when the Archangel created swords and cut them all down, but then Dandoma slammed a fist into Michael's backside, sending the Archangel soaring into the sky where Ladora, already transformed into a dragon, doused him in a whirlwind of fire. They knew better than to let him have a moment's rest. Baruka, riding on Altabaru, tried to hit Michael with his 2 lances. They were blocked by a pair of swords from Michael, who had dispersed the flames with a single swipe of his blades. However, this left him open to Liban, who used his sword in conjunction with ice magic to create a chilling cutting blade. While that attack also failed when Michael raised his other sword to block it, it gave Saroorg the necessary time to prepare his attack. The ground exploding beneath his feet, Saroorg threw himself into the air faster than human projectiles, reaching Michael in less than a second. He punched Michael with all the strength he possessed, only to grimace when a sword dug into his back. His attack had knocked Michael back, but not only had the Archangel blocked it, he'd retaliated with his other sword. Regulus. I'm all right, Master. Focus on the battle. I know. His peerage was working in pairs. Libin worked in conjunction with Coriana, who used her own magic to boost his. While he couldn't get close to hurting Michael, his swords were now strong enough that they actually froze over the light swords that the Archangel was using. Before their foe had time to recover, Kuisha, his queen, used her power of hold to create a portal that sucked up Michael's swords and sent them back at him. The bladed weapons didn't pierce him, but they knocked him into Ladora's twin spear attack. Saroorg waited and watched, his eyes on the device attached to Michael's neck. All he needed to do was destroy that device. Gathering his power, Saroorg breathed in, breathed out, waited until Mistida and Gandoma created an opening for him. Then he launched himself at Michael like a blitzkrieging tank. Michael created another spear, a huge one, but Saroorg wasn't interested in spears. Gandama and Ladora whittled the attack down before Kuisha sucked it into a portal that launched it back at Michael. As divine energy cascaded all over the place from the explosion, Mistida and Coriana created an opening for him by creating a barrier that protected him from damage, mostly. Soon he was through the attack. His armor, Regulus Nemea, was smoking from holy damage, and his face was burnt, but he was in the perfect position. Michael wasn't even a centimeter away. Saroorg reached out and yanked the strange necklace-like device from the Archangel's neck. It was a good thing he'd done so. Saroorg had reached his limit. Regulus transformed from armor back into a giant lion as Saroorg crashed face first into the ground and rolled across the destroyed and craggy surface. He dug his hands into the dirt, scrabbling to keep himself from rolling, and though it took a while, he eventually stopped himself. Good thing, too. He was centimeters away from falling into a chasm. He blinked several times and strained his muscles to stand up, but Regulus Ray Leather Rex Imperial Purpure was a technique that did more than merely grant him strength. It exhausted him to the point where he could barely move. All he managed to do was roll himself onto his back. As he stared at the sky, several people landed beside him. Most of them were his peerage. However, Michael had also joined them, his eyes clear, lips turned into a sad smile. I appreciate your help, Michael said gently. You and your peerage fought bravely and saved my life. Saroorg tried to open his mouth, but he was too tired to even do that. Regulus spoke for him. It was no trouble, is what Master wants to say. Michael's smile seemed to say otherwise, but he made no comment. Since you saved me, allow me to return the favor by aiding all of you in your task. He looked up at the battles still taking place around them. I shall go and free my comrades from Loki's mind control. Saroorg would have said thank you. He didn't. He still couldn't find the strength to open his mouth. I appreciate your assistance, is what Master wants to tell you. Fortunately, he had a Nemean lion who could speak for him. It was almost creepy how Regulus could practically read his mind. Devil Ninja, boost. Rias bit her lower lip as she struggled to keep herself from moving forward to confront Sirzex. It was hard. Her peerage was on the ropes, and she couldn't do a single thing about it, not yet. Not until she had enough power that confronting him had a chance of success. Boost. She didn't know how long they had been boosting her power, but it was easy to feel the difference, since every time Issei used the Dragon Emperor Gauntlet's ability, her powers doubled. Rias had been keeping count. Her powers had been boosted 27 times. What was 27 times 10? 270. So, they'd been at this for 270 seconds, which was close to the 5-minute mark that Ravel had set. Boost. She watched the battle between her peerage and her brother. Kiba and Irina were doing their best to harass him with guerrilla tactics, while Akino and Rossweiss fired at him with long-range bombardment. Akino used primarily lightning, though she also used the divine lightning of her heritage, of Barakiel's heritage. Rossweiss was using a wide array of magic that Rias had only dreamed of before. Fire, ice, lightning, wind. The elements were hers to command, and she commanded them with an enviable talent. While they kept Sirzex busy, Gasper used Forbidden View to stall Sirzex from attacking while Kaneko landed a deft attack that knocked him away. Well, that was what they were trying to do. Boost. Even as she watched, Kaneko's entire chest was caved in from a punch by her brother. She wanted to scream when the Nekosho was sent flying. Asia, who sat in the wings, went after the girl and healed her, but just seeing what happened hurt. She wanted to fight, she wanted to protect her family. How long would she have to wait here? Boost. Oh okay. Issei gasped for breath. That should do it, T30 boosts. Sorry it took so long. Issei had probably never used the boosted gear to boost someone else's power this many times, especially since Rias had been keeping track of everyone's progress, and she knew that the most Issei could use on himself right now was 20. Sweat poured from her pawn's forehead as he hunched his shoulders like he was carrying a world's worth of weight. His face was slightly red. She didn't think it was from being in close proximity to her. He'd really strained himself. Thank you, Eyes, Rias said. Please rest now, leave the rest up to me. Alright. Rias could feel the power flowing through her, coursing through her body like an undeniable, raging torrent. She wasn't sure if she could adequately describe it. Rias felt like she could take on the entire world by herself. She wondered if this was what Sirzex felt like every day. Revel, Rias said into her communicator. I'm ready. Okay, everyone, clear out. Rias is going to take on Sirzex now. Rias took a deep breath. Breathe in, hold it, breathe out. She prepared herself both mentally and physically for what she was about to do, attempt a feat which she had never done before. Attempt to condense the powers of destruction into herself like her brother could do. It was far harder than she imagined it to be. The powers of destruction were an uncontrollable disaster, annihilation in its purest form. Trying to condense those powers was like trying to stop a star from going supernova. Sweat broke out on her forehead as she struggled to control her powers. Her body shook as the strain caused lightning to course through her. It hurt. However, she struggled on, pushing her mind and body past their limits to do what she had seen her brother do only a few times in her entire life. She succeeded. Human-shaped aura of destruction. Her brother's ultimate technique. His magnum opus. The ability to convert oneself into the powers of destruction that destroyed everything regardless of the will. It felt weird. It was like her body was there, but she had no mass, no weight. She supposed that was because her body was now composed entirely of energy. Rias tried to breathe out, discovered that, for whatever reason, she couldn't draw breath, and then decided to just go for broke. It took less than a second to reach Sirzex. It was like she had teleported. Rias didn't waste any time. The moment she was before her brother, she slammed into him with a right hook that made him go flying backward with a loud sonic boom as he broke the sound barrier. The mountain behind him was destroyed. Completely. The entire Mount Olympus, which stood at an elevation of 2,918 meters, exploded in a violent spray of dirt and rocks. It was as if someone had buried a nuclear bomb deep beneath the mountain and then set it off. Everyone else shielded their eyes as they struggled to remain where they were, but Rias did not. She floated where she was, her body leaking powers of destruction, which annihilated everything that tried to touch her. Sirzex wouldn't die from just that. And she was right. Not even a second later, she felt an immense surge of power, and seconds after that, Sirzex, his body now transformed into the human-shaped aura of destruction, came at her. Rias met him head-on. Their clash caused the very air to explode as powers of destruction met powers of destruction. Rias was not used to fighting hand-to-hand, but she had been practicing every day that she could with Naruto and the others. While she was a king, and a king's job was to remain in the back and guide her peerage to victory, she didn't want to be incapable of protecting her friends when the need came. It was why she'd done her best to learn how to fight barehanded. Her powers, boosted by the boosted gear, allowed her to keep fighting against her brother. Their powers leaked out of their bodies, incapable of being fully contained, and began destroying the surrounding area. The ground beneath them slowly ground away as though it was evaporating, forming a large crater that grew larger with time. Every attack and counterattack caused the area around them to explode. Throughout it all, Rias realized something. She was not as powerful as Sirzek's. Even when she was using human-shaped aura of destruction, Rias did not have Sirzek's power. She might have been able to keep up with him in the beginning, but the longer the fight went on, the less energy she had. Her reserves of demonic power were rapidly dwindling. Meanwhile, Sirzek's was still going strong. Rias, Sirzek's said suddenly. It seems you've become ridiculously strong in the time I've been away. Rias faltered. Sirzek's brother. Sirzek's pulled back. The aura surrounding him disappeared. Sirzek's, now back in his normal human form, grinned at her. I have to thank you. If you hadn't begun using the powers of destruction like that, I wouldn't have been able to break free of that mind control device. Rias was so shocked that all the power she had gained from the boosted gear evaporated. She transformed back into her normal self. Her body felt heavier than she was used to. But, how? Still grinning, Sirzek's pointed at his neck, where the control collar had been wrapped around. It wasn't there anymore. It's thanks to you. When you used the powers of destruction, my body recognized you as a major threat and used it as well. When I transformed into my true form, the collar was destroyed. He scratched the back of his neck and blushed. I apologize for continuing to fight, but you had become so strong that I wanted to test how powerful you've become myself. Oh, she wanted to be mad at her brother, but she wasn't. She was kind of tired. Everything was spinning, and the world appeared out of focus. Whoa, Rias felt, more than saw, her body leaning against someone else's. It was probably Sirzek's, but she couldn't tell. She was too tired to lift her head. I guess you're not used to using the powers of destruction like that, Sirzek said in her ear. Once we get home, I'll train you. Rias would have told him that she was only able to transform like that because Issei had boosted her powers, but she was too tired. A shockwave suddenly rippled through the air. That aura, is that Naruto? Sirzek asked. Probably, Riza said. Holy shit, I knew he was powerful, but I didn't know he was that powerful. And wait, why the hell is he taking on the Greek pantheon by himself? Rias was too tired to answer, but, even with her head leaning down, her lips still quirked upward into an amused smirk. Devil Ninja. Naruto wore a fierce snarl as he slammed a Rasengan into some guy's face. He had learned a few seconds ago that this guy's name was Poseidon. As the man went flying so far that all Naruto saw of him was a large splash as he crashed into the sea, Naruto turned away to block several arrows being shot from a bow. He knocked them aside with his hands, but then he was hit in the chest with a lightning bolt. Grimacing as the bolt tried to penetrate his stomach, Naruto exerted more influence over Kurama's chakra and used the truth-seeking ball, transformed into a sword, to slice the thing in half. Then he sent 5 more truth-seeking balls at the one who sent the lightning bolt, Zeus, who created blades made of lightning to swat them away. Sadly for Zeus, Naruto could control where they went. The balls curved around him and impaled his back, though they didn't do more than break the skin. Damn these gods and their ridiculous durability. The hell is this guy made of? Naruto had no time to contemplate that as someone with teleporting abilities like his father appeared before him. Being used to high-speed battles, Naruto was able to block all of his punches and kicks, but this blonde dude was clearly a distraction. The woman with the bow and arrows was lining up a shot behind him. You're pretty good, Naruto said. The man grinned. It was bright and sunny, kinda like his own. Thanks, he said before vanishing. Naruto spun around as the air behind him whistled and punched the arrow aimed at his back. The arrow exploded, launching him backward, toward the waiting first of the vanilla-haired woman, Hera, whose bright smile made him understand that she was going to enjoy this. Don't think poorly of me, child, she said before trying to deck him in the face. Naruto disappeared before she could. He reappeared behind her and struck her with a double heel kick to the shoulder blades. Fudden. Suin Rasenshuriken. Naruto created a Rasenshuriken in each hand and lobbed them at 2 of the pair of gods that came at him from the front. Zeus and the blonde man had clearly learned their lesson from last time. They dodged, though it didn't stop the blonde one, Apollo, from getting sucked into his attack, which exploded the moment he touched one of the blades, creating a giant sphere of compressed wind blades that cut into the man. Zeus avoided it by destroying the Rasenshuriken with a lightning bolt. Naruto cursed. Naruto, what is it? I'm kinda busy. Naruto flew above another lightning bolt that Zeus sent his way. He frowned when his feet tingled with electric jolts. His cloak should have protected him from that. You're running out of chakra. What do you mean? Like, I'm running out. No, your chakra is being siphoned off. Your reserves are shrinking. They're what? Naruto was so shocked by what Kurama had said that he couldn't avoid the punch from Hera. A loud crack rang across the battlefield, which Naruto could have sworn were his ribs breaking. The world around him suddenly blurred as his lungs were deprived of oxygen. Pain struck him before he could even blink, and when he came to, he was lying in a crater and Kurama was shouting nonsense. I don't know what's happening, but your chakra reserves are growing smaller. It's different from someone stealing your chakra. It's like the amount that you have at your disposal is shrinking. How is that possible? Naruto groaned as he stood to his feet. His chakra cloak was flickering. He swayed as he stood, blood dripping down his face. It took him a moment to notice the stinging sensation in his left arm, but he absently realized that his arm had been twisted the wrong way. I don't know. However, I know the source. It's Sage Mode. Sage Mode. I noticed it when you started fighting. Your chakra began shrinking. I thought it was just the natural chakra you lost while using chakra extensive techniques, but that's not it. Your chakra pool is actually decreasing. I have no idea how this is possible. I see, so the more I use Sage Mode, the smaller my chakra becomes. Yes, Naruto frowned. He didn't understand how this was possible, but he was beginning to suspect that something had happened when he was thrown into this world that was causing these problems, or perhaps his mere existence was something that this world couldn't accommodate for. He didn't know. It wasn't like he had knowledge on interdimensional travel. This was also different from Kagaya's ability to create her own dimensions. Either way, Naruto was in a pickle. He was losing chakra. No, his capacity was shrinking. This meant that, eventually, he'd no longer be useful so long as he kept using Sage Mode. Damn. What should he do? It looks like you are running low on power, Zeus said, landing in front of Naruto with the 9 other Greek gods that he'd been locked in combat with for who knew how long. I still have enough left to kick your ass, Naruto snarked. Arrogant prick. Calm down, dear, Hera said, raising a hand. It's clear that he can no longer fight. He's just goading you. Zeus growled but said nothing. What should we do now? Asked Poseidon. Obviously, we should kill him, Zeus said. But is that the right thing to do? Asked Apollo, the blonde man. I mean, he's just trying to protect his comrades. How does that excuse his actions, or their actions, for that matter? I believe we may have been hasty, another woman said, a beautiful lady with silver hair. He didn't know her name, but he'd seen her hanging in the back. Naruto could only assume she was their strategist. We did not listen to this child when he told us his reasons for defending his leaders, but I think what he has to say affects us as well. We should hear him out. Don't mask your intentions behind such a blatant lie, Zeus grumbled. This was the outcome you were hoping for all along, isn't it, Athena? I'll not deny that I was not thrilled by the idea of fighting an unknown opponent without knowing why, Athena admitted. In war, information is more important than brute strength. So says you, a scarred man said. I am a goddess of war, Eris, Athena said calmly. We don't know anything about what is happening or why. I'd like to know whether or not the people before me are truly our enemies. It seems more to me like they are simply pawns being played with by a chess master. Don't try to act intelligent with me, cunt. All of you calm down, Hera shouted, silencing everyone. We have company. At that moment, Circex, Michael, and all of the 3 factions' alliance leaders, along with Rias and the others who'd gone to rescue them, descended from the sky. Circex and Michael stood at the front, but Azazel, Gabrielle, Shemhazai, and Seraphol were right behind them. As one, all 6 leaders bowed deeply. I apologize for the inconvenience we've caused you, Circex spoke for all of them. Please do not blame Naruto for what happened. It was our carelessness that led to this situation. Perhaps you should tell us what is going on, Hera suggested, suddenly calm and placid. Naruto looked at Zeus, who stood behind the woman. Of course, Circex replied. We'll tell you everything that you want to know. As the 3 factions' leaders spoke with the Greek pantheon, Naruto finally allowed himself to slump back in relief. It looked like this battle was over. Fuck, he was so tired. Devil Ninja. 2 days had passed. All of the devils, angels, and fallen angels that Rias and the others had convinced to help them in their mission had returned to the underworld. Meanwhile, the Grimoire and Sona peerages had gone back to Kuo. Several meetings had taken place between the three factions and the Greek pantheon, though neither Naruto nor Rias were privy to what happened behind closed doors. That said, Sears had promised to inform them of what happened when negotiations concluded. Naruto was sitting in the occult research clubroom. Classes had ended. It was back to business as usual. Naruto was working on his homework. It was math. Naruto hated math, and school, and anything that involved learning useless crap that he would never use. He still didn't even know why he needed to know about Pythagoreans and ossicles and what have you. This would not do him any good in real life. Still, he was in school, and Rias wanted him to do well, so he had to do it. He was the only one there at the moment. The other members of Rias's peerage were out on the job. That meant he was pretty much alone. As he was trying to learn about quadratic equations, the door to the clubroom opened and Rossweiss stepped inside. Rossweiss, Naruto greeted. "What's up? I was just wondering if Master Rias was in," Rossweiss said. "Master? Ah, yes. I didn't tell you, did I?" said Rossweiss. "I've become a member of Rias's peerage." "You have?" "Yes. I was reluctant at first, but Rias convinced me after she mentioned all of the great benefits that comes with being a devil under her peerage. I'm really looking forward to the excellent pay and full coverage. I'll be able to buy a lot from this 100 yen store that I found the other day." Naruto wasn't really surprised that Rossweiss had become a member of Rias's peerage, but he was shocked that it had happened so soon. Still, he thought it would be good for her. It was like a new lease on life. "I'm happy for you. I know you'll fit in with us." "Thank you." Rossweiss smiled, though that smile quickly left and was replaced with a frown. "I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to ask, where is Ophis?" "Ah." Naruto gave her a strained smile. "Ophis is busy." Rossweiss tilted her head. "Busy. Very busy," Naruto confirmed with a serious nod. "Devil Ninja." Ophis frowned as she stepped out of a vortex of her own creation. The ability to travel through dimensions at will was one that only she and Great Red possessed. Well, there might have been a few others who could do the same thing, but they couldn't enter another dimension so easily, especially not one belonging to a different pantheon. The area that she appeared around was definitely Asgard, but it looked like a major battle had taken place there. Everything was destroyed. The buildings were wrecked, the mountains were gone, and there was a giant crater in the ground that must have been at least 100 meters deep. Ophis walked up to the lip of the crater. It was perfectly smooth. That must have been Sears's powers of destruction at work. "This is an unexpected surprise," a voice said above her. It was Loki. "Ophis, the Ouroboros dragon, to what do I owe the honor of your visit?" Loki wasn't the only one present. There were several dozen people surrounding her, gods and goddesses of the Norse pantheon. All of them were bearing weapons, hammers and knives and swords and staves, which were clearly pointed at her with hostile intent. Ophis did not respond with words, for words were useless and not the reason she was there. If she wanted to exchange words with someone, then she would talk to Naruto and his friends. She actually liked them. Her first attack was launched at a man with red hair, a beard, and a hammer. It was aimed at the device on his neck, which was destroyed. Sadly, her attack was still powerful enough that he was sent soaring into a mountain wall several dozen kilometers away. Ophis ignored him. The attack on the red one seemed to be the signal for the others to attack, for they came at her en masse, attacking from every conceivable direction and angle. Such an attack would have overwhelmed anyone else. No one else could have survived such a situation. But she was not just anyone. Ophis unleashed her power, an explosion of energy that forced everyone away from her, sending them all sailing through the sky like ragdolls. Ophis then launched her snakes at everyone present. Each snake latched onto someone, biting the device on their necks and injecting he powers into them, destroying them with ease. All of the gods and goddesses around her were unconscious now. They must have been under that control device for a long time. The device put a huge mental strain on people because it forced their mind into submission and made them obey the will of the person who the device was attuned to. Ophis didn't really know how the device worked, exactly, but everything she knew, she had learned from Naruto, who also didn't know everything about them. He did say something about nature chakra, but Ophis didn't know much about nature chakra either. I see now why people call you the Ouroboros dragon and the Infinity Dragon God. Your powers truly are extraordinary. Loki paused before extending a hand toward her. Why don't you join me? I could use the help of someone with your power. Ophis didn't even need a second to answer that question. She launched a massive column of black energy at Loki, who evaded the attack. She frowned. It looked like she would have to use something stronger. Come now, Ophis, Loki began, can't we be civilized about this? I have nothing to say to you, Ophis said. She sent another blast of power at Loki, who, again, evaded the attack with ease. That's a pity, Loki said. Having the Ouroboros dragon on my side would have made reaching my goals easier. Don't care. Loki was definitely a slippery opponent. She had been firing her attacks almost non-stop now, but he was still evading every attack that came at him. Ophis could have used a more powerful attack, but that would have meant destroying Asgard, which would have also meant killing everyone there. In most circumstances, Ophis wouldn't have cared about something like who she killed, but she knew that Naruto didn't want any unnecessary bloodshed. It looked like she would have to get creative. She sighed. How bothersome. Because she was sending a constant stream of deadly attacks his way, Loki had no time to counter her, busy as he was dodging every barrage of black energy that she sent at him. She kept him busy with that. Meanwhile, she discreetly sent several snakes into the ground, which she had crawl beneath the surface. Once she had positioned them where she wanted them, Ophis began herding Loki toward her snakes. Loki didn't seem to realize what he was doing. His face was suffused with red as he scrunched it up in concentration. He was probably getting frustrated by his inability to counterattack. She sent several beams over his head, which came so close to hitting him that they grazed his hair. Ophis frowned. He was too quick for her slow attacks to hit. She could have probably taken him out in hand-to-hand combat, but she didn't actually know how to fight barehanded. Perhaps she should ask Naruto to teach her when she returned home. Home. Even as she continued attacking, the thought that entered her mind surprised her. She was beginning to think of Naruto's home as her home. No, it was more like, wherever Naruto was, that was her home. How odd. When had she begun to truly think of that boy's lap as the place where she belonged? Ophis realized that she was losing focus. Shaking her head, she turned her attention back to Loki, forcing him to the ground with a barrage of long-range firepower. Oddly, her attacks weren't spells. Ophis didn't know any true magic. She was just releasing her power in short bursts. Lower and lower Loki went, until, finally, his feet touched the ground. That was when Ophis had her snakes leap out from the ground and attack, sinking their fangs into Loki's thighs, calves, butt, and torso. The Asgardian screamed in surprise and pain. He struggled to pry them off, but the snakes were already doing damage. What is going on? What is this? Loki screamed as his body expanded like a balloon. You wanted power, didn't you? Asked Ophis. That's why I've decided to give you power. No. Loki screamed as his body continued swelling. His cheeks were now round and puffy. They reminded Ophis of a Jigglypuff. I didn't mean it like this. I don't want power like this. No, no. Cracks started appearing on Loki's body, spreading quickly as Ophis's power overwhelmed him. When Ophis gave people power, she normally only gave them a single snake, the reason being that a person, whether they were god or devil or human, could only hold one snake's worth of power without, well, exploding. Loki had 12 snakes latched onto him, and all of those snakes were injecting her energy into him. It was too much power for even a god to take. With one final wail of despair, Loki, trickster god of Norse mythology, exploded in a violent spray of energy. Ophis remained where she was as the explosion swept over her. A barrier appeared in front of her, protecting her vision as a shock wave rushed over the land, destroying everything in its wake. She didn't hesitate to place the gods and goddesses who'd been rendered unconscious under her protection, containing them within a bubble that kept them safe from her power. Sadly, Asgard was not so lucky. Ophis frowned as cracks appeared above her, tears in the dimension. Had she used too much power? Perhaps she should have only used 2 or 3 snakes. Well, it was too late to worry about that now. These Asgardians might be upset that their dimension was destroyed, but really, it was their fault for letting themselves get caught in Loki's trap. With a loud sound like thunder striking the ground, the dimension of Asgard was destroyed, and the swirling nebula of the void greeted them. All of the Asgardians were still safely ensconced in her protective bubbles. They would not die from being exposed to the void. Nodding to herself, Ophis began moving, pulling the group of gods and goddesses along behind her. It was time to return home. It was time to go back to Naruto. After what she had done for him, he had better give her lots of head petting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.